Chapter 1653. Brilliant Light was dazzled by the scene. He was overjoyed because not only did Xianyuan produce a peerless character, they even produced a peerless escape technique. Everyone paled in fright when they saw the technique. The only thing that worried him was that the requirements for this technique wouldn't be too strict, right? Hopefully, it was a technique that could be passed down and not something that only one person could learn by chance. This wasn't a rare occurrence in the history of the sword vein. Fortuitous opportunities were also divided into individual and group inheritances. My Xianyuan doesn't accept people of dubious origins. You'd better make up a better story about yourself before you talk to me. Rector Back glared at him. What was he thinking? Wasn't he defeated by me? If I don't want to be Xuanyuan's disciple, wouldn't it be the same? He knew that it would be difficult for him to cross paths with Xianyuan. What good would it be if he destroyed a primordial spirit with a bright future? There were no new changes in the battlefield. Actually, it had only been a few dozen breaths since Lu Xiaoyi used the spatial escape technique. The python was so huge that even if it stood there motionless, it would still take some time to chop it down. This was the benefit of having a huge body. The two pieces of trash were just watching the show. Only Lytic, who was in the middle of the battle, could truly feel the changes in the flying sword. He could clearly see that the swordsman's spatial escape and spatial kill were not untraceable. They had their own rules. In these few dozen breaths, the swordsman had entered and exited the spatial dimension 7 times. The shortest time he entered was 2 breaths, and the longest time was 6 breaths. He knew very well that the swordsman was doing this on purpose so that there wouldn't be any rules. Why did he have to enter and exit so frequently? Couldn't he just stay in the spatial dimension and release his flying sword? He could also see that the swordsman had a reason to come out. If he didn't come out, he wouldn't be able to maintain the strength of his flying sword. The effect of the swordsman releasing his flying sword in the origin world and the spatial dimension was different. Sending a flying sword through the dimensional space to kill him would be weakened. Therefore, a swordsman's attack was actually a hybrid type of attack. With the swords released in the main world as the main body, and the flying swords released from the dimensional space as the supplement, it formed a set of attacks that looked no different from a normal state. However, the truth was that there was a difference between the two types of attacks. The flying swords released in the origin world were the most powerful, but as time passed, their power would quickly decrease, and their numbers would also decrease, because they had to stab him. This time would not exceed 6 or 7 breaths. In other words, if the swordsman wanted to maintain this level of attack, he would have to come out of the dimensional space, release his sword, and then run back into the dimensional space. This was the secret behind the swordsman's attack style. The problem was that even though he knew the secret behind the swordsman's attack, he didn't have a perfect way to counter it. The perfect way to counter it was to counter it without taking any risks. There was no such method. He still had to take the risk. The way to take the risk was to enter Meho Roja's final form, the chaotic form. He had to wait for the swordsman to reappear in the origin world. This was a battle of wits and courage. Temporary gains and losses didn't mean anything. The one who had the last laugh was the true winner. There were plenty of examples of people who had been suppressing their opponents throughout the battle, but in the end, they were defeated by their opponents, who had been struggling bitterly. He had experienced it too many times. He had to be patient, he warned himself. This was a very scary opponent, even scarier than many of the sun gods he had met. He rarely felt the threat of death when fighting against other sun gods, but in front of this god swordsman, he truly felt it. He didn't wait for the swordsman to come out. Just when he thought the swordsman was about to come out and the swords were about to run out, the swordsman uncharacteristically made a big move. This was truly an extraordinary battle. Who was the one who extinguished the lights? Countless stars in the surrounding starry skies suddenly extinguished and lit up again. At this moment, all of the sword lights seemed to be reborn from blood, erupting with a power that was several times stronger than normal, cutting the already riddled python into countless pieces. This time, the python's body could no longer recover, collapsing and disappearing in the void. Once again, the two cripples on the side had a taste of the power of a divine bull. Lytic Khan was reborn again, still as a python. Just when the python's body was expanding, Lu Xiaoyi leaped out of the origin world and began to hit him while he was down. This was an inevitable choice. He had already beheaded his opponent twice, and whether it was from a technique or a mentality, there was no reason to let him go so easily. He had to be ruthless when he needed to be, so he wouldn't let the situation he had fought so hard for go to waste. At this moment, the seemingly expanding python suddenly exploded, and countless profound and ancient auras spread out, covering the space within a radius of 100,000 miles. Lu Xiaoyi, who had just come out of the origin world, was caught right in the middle. Since he didn't know where Lidic Khan would come from, it was normal to use an area of effect forbidden technique. However, Lidic Khan's chaotic form wasn't a forbidden technique, but a technique that could replace him with his own life. Meiho Luojia's third form wasn't actually a battle form. Its significance lay in the upper realm, the breakthrough to the half-immortal level. It belonged to the category of pure cultivation. Cultivators could cultivate it after reaching the sun god level, and then gradually perfect their chaotic form. When the chaotic form was completed, it meant that they had become a half-immortal. Therefore, no matter who cultivated it at the monarch level, it would only be a half-completed chaotic form. However, how could things be so clearly separated in the cultivation world? Although the chaotic state was not a combat form, it was undeniable that its level was still above the balanced state and the fearless state. It also had all kinds of magical uses of this form. It was very magical. It was a kind of virtual thing that was even more structured at the level of yang spirit. For example, the space covered by this chaotic form was the chaotic state when the universe was first born after the 5 ties. At that time, the innate Daos were still incomplete, time had just started to appear, and space had yet to take shape. In other words, in this chaotic form, there was no distinction between space and time. Of course, there was no origin world. The entire universe was a complete space, the only space. Later on, there would be all kinds of changes in the innate Daos, and that was the true subdivision of the universe. The only reason Lidic Khan used the chaotic form in this place was that no one could use the power of space. No one could find the entrance to the origin world because theoretically, there wasn't a second space here. As for Lidic Khan, he had already turned into the chaotic form in this place. He had no physical form, no likes or dislikes, nothing. He was the chaotic form, and the chaotic form was him. This was his ultimate counterattack. He entered the chaotic form, then used the killing of the 3 swordsmen to take the next step and break through to the half-immortal level. There was no waste drum, no drumstick, and no practical way to attack. It was a perfect understanding of the chaotic form. Then, with this perfect understanding, he would completely turn this area into a chaotic void. Then he would take the next step and form the clear and turbid chi. The 3 swordsmen were the best nourishment for the clear and turbid chi. Chapter 1654. P.S. On the Qidian app, there's a link to the 2020 Best Author of the Year. Well, Old Fallen is definitely not the winner, but if he's at the end, he'll look worse. There are only a few votes, but it's better than nothing. It doesn't cost any money, just a few seconds of your time. Thank you for your support. The event lasts for a week. If you poke it for a week, you shouldn't be tired. Please. The 2 cripples were among them. Because they were too engrossed in watching, and because they didn't really care about their current state, they forgot to maintain a safe distance. So when Ridichin's chaos form appeared, the 2 of them were like meat buns hitting a dog. Ridichin didn't have a good impression of the 2. As long as they were swordsmen, he didn't mind taking them away. We have to return. Backtree was very melancholic. You say it as if you don't have to return. No matter who wins this time, your outcome will be the same. Light Illumination said disdainfully. Backtree looked left and right, but he didn't really care. His future was as bleak as Light Illumination's. For proud people like them, it was time for them to end their own lives after watching this show. So now that they were pulled into the chaos realm, it was like adding mud to their pants that were already full of shit. Why would they care? Then the 2 of them began to analyze the process of returning. live and learn, and even death couldn't stop their curiosity and thirst for knowledge. When the chaos is formed and the universe is first separated, the clear air rises and the turbid air falls. Thus, there is heaven and earth. I wonder if you and I will have clear or turbid air when the time comes. Bactry wasn't a talkative person, but at the end of his life, he spoke more, as if to make up for some regret. Light illumination said, "This person is trying to break through, so he will turn everything in this void into chaos, including you and me, and also junior brother little E. We can't see him, but we can feel him, because he is the chaos that is everywhere." This is a true confrontation of the Tao realm. The understanding of the Tao realm in Hung River orthodoxy isn't much in the main world. If we were Dharma cultivators, he wouldn't do this. But we're swordsmen. Bactry laughed. Yes. I've never heard of any swordsman in the cultivation world who can cultivate the 5 ties. Even chaos is rare. Therefore, he had nothing to fear. He has grasped the sword vein's weakness. Brilliant Light was not convinced. Even if you don't understand, you can still struggle. Could it be that he was going to surrender just like that? Let's not talk about stopping him. Even if he spends a bit more effort to buy us some time, that would be good enough. Chu Chung was speechless. Why are you struggling? Don't talk about the 5 ties. I think you don't know anything about Handan either. Other than the ability to kill, what else do you know? Luminous Light snorted. As long as you struggle, there will be meaning. Because my junior brother is still here. This was because there was still the possibility of someone passing by and interfering with it from the outside. Because there might be an outbreak of celestial phenomena. Because of the possibility of void beasts breaking in. When these accidents happen and you realize that you didn't do anything because you were disheartened, that's the stupidest thing. Back Puppet was stunned for a moment before it clasped its hands and said, "You're right. We swordsmen will never allow ourselves to be captured. It's one thing to want to die, but it's another thing if someone wants to kill us." The two of them wanted to share some of the pressure on Lu Xiaoyi, even if it was insignificant. Thus, they began to discuss how to resist the erosion of Handan. The two of them were not proficient in the basic theoretical research of the 5 ties and Handan. However, even if they were not proficient in it, they were still primordial soul-perfected lords. With their realms, they would still be able to comprehend some things by analogy. They would not be blind. Even if they could not resist systematically, they could still blindly stir things up. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he had been tricked. However, this kind of trick was hard to avoid. It was not a problem of fighting, but a problem of cultivation structure. If Riddick Khan had used this trick on him from the beginning, he would not have been able to avoid it. However, he was forced to do so now. In this sense, his battle was still valuable. At the very least, he had seen the 2 rebirths of the Hengi Yang god. From this, he could deduce many things. In the eyes of the 2 useless people, reincarnation was completely meaningless. However, in his eyes, he could see more. This was because he understood the Hengi Yang god better. He had even fought with one of the Hengi Yang gods before. He had his own unique perspective on the past of the people of Hengi Yang god. In the eyes of Bright Light and Backlight, there were nearly 100 pieces of history that were messy. However, in his eyes, there were clues to be found. This included the various bases of judgment of the ancestors in the Sword Dao tablet, including his own very rich and complicated past. In fact, he already had a basic judgment. He could totally try to kill it. However, he did not expect that when he was ready, the other party had already turned into Handan. If even the person turned into Handan, where could he slash? Next, it was not a problem that could be solved with a sword. When his consciousness was placed in Handan, he quickly understood his situation. He was different from the 2 useless people. This was because he originally had the foundation of the small universe when he was in the nascent soul stage. He had the foundation of various connate great Daos. For hundreds of years, he had been deeply immersed in the theory of the 5 ties and Handan. He was deeply immersed in this aspect. In addition, he had the countless genius ideas of the cultivators of the Big Fruit Plate. He could also be considered a master in this aspect. However, he could not verify how great he was through the fragments. Perhaps it was just bad luck that he had not encountered it? Or was it that he had encountered it but could not sense it? This place had become his new battlefield. He was full of confidence in this. Hundun was also known as Hundun. It referred to the misty state where qi, form, and substance were one without separation before the universe was formed. It was a stage in the concept of time and space in the cultivation world. It was after the fourth taisu of the connate five tais. Tai-yi, Tai-chu, Tai-shur, Tai-su, Hundun, Tai-cheat, heaven and earth, all things. From the silent Tai-yi to Tai-shur, it was a process from formless to corporeal. Tai-chu was the beginning of qi. It was only at the stage of Tai-shur that it became visible. Change of form and have substance. This is the essence of Taisu. Qi, form, and substance were one without separation. This was Hundun. Hundun was a unified state that had not been separated. It was also known as one which was also Tai Chi from Tai Chi. One was divided into two. The clear and light one was the heaven above, and the turbid one was the earth below. Then the heaven and earth gave birth to man and all things. Lidik Khan wanted to achieve his goal of reaching the upper realm in this chaotic space, and also wanted to destroy them. In fact, what he wanted to rely on was this process of separating the clear and the turbid. If he succeeded, the three unlucky fellows would become the clear and turbid qi and return to their respective positions. They would also become the stepping stones of the Hengi half-immortal. If he failed, Lu Xiaoyi could not see clearly for the time being. Would it be that he did not need to kill the 3 lives Hengi Yang God, and it would automatically perish? Or would he need to intervene? These things could only follow his feelings. There were no precedents to refer to. The first thing he had to face now was the omnipresent chaos in the surrounding space that was squeezing him, assimilating him, and melting him, because he was the only impurity in this chaos. At this time, he still did not know that the 2 cripples had also been involved. In fact, even if he knew, it would be meaningless. He could not even protect himself, and it was impossible for him to help others first. In this kind of contest of life and death, he had walked out. In fact, everyone had walked out. Chapter 1655. There were 2 ways to break Lidik Khan's Tao realm kill. The first was to go against the flow. For example, the chaos he was in was dissolving everything within, and then developing in the direction of clear and turbid qi. Then all he needed to do was to push back the chaos and push the state of this place towards essence. Once the state of this place was no longer chaos but Taisu, it meant that Meho Roha's final form had failed, and Lidik Khan's cultivation had failed. The other was to go with the flow, not obstructing the change of the chaos, but controlling the change of the chaos in his own hands. In other words, he would turn the chaos here into his own chaos and achieve his own Tao realm. He would strip the people of Hung River naked and end up working for someone else. Lu Xiaoyi chose the latter. This was because of his personality. A thief never leaves empty-handed. This was his philosophy all along. Therefore, he sat cross-legged in the air and completely let go of himself. He took the initiative to merge into the chaos and immediately discovered the existence of 2 unlucky people. He couldn't be bothered to care about them. Here, he had to thank those research-type cultivators of the big fruit platter. Countless spiritual gatherings and all kinds of strange ideas had truly brought out the wisdom of humans to the extreme. It also gave him more than one method. It was the whimsical product of many shut-in cultivators. Now that he used it here, it was enough to make the people of Hung River suffer. He wasn't fighting alone. He had a solid theoretical foundation behind him. In his opinion, in such a contest, the people of Hung River wouldn't be a match for him with their not-so-outstanding Tao realm knowledge, right? After all, only the mainstream Orthodox Taoists would study these things, and Hung River had long deviated from the mainstream direction. They were more inclined towards those mysterious paths. But when he really immersed himself in it, he realized that something was wrong. This wasn't the true Tao realm of chaos. It was the fusion of Hung River's Tao realm and the Tao realm of chaos. It was the mutated Tao of chaos. Moreover, He wasn't sure if the clear and turbid qi would really form heaven and earth after separating. Maybe it would form Lin Jiaxiang and Saintess Cave? When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel a chill. He couldn't lose this battle. Otherwise, he would be letting down his ancestors. Facing Li Taikan's invasion of the chaos, Ji Hao had the upper hand. But, facing Meiho Roha's divine power, Ji Hao unsurprisingly fell into a disadvantage. First of all, Ji Hao didn't know much about this divine power, and second of all, the divine power of Hung River System was especially great. With his true power as a dark spirit, it was way too difficult for Ji Hao to completely overturn this divine power. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't overturn the power of Moho Roha's divine head, while Ridich Khan couldn't do anything to this swordsman's pure chaos Dao. After all, it was the purest great Dao in the world. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew that if this continued, without the help of external forces, he would definitely lose. This was because his cultivation level determined his foundation. If this continued for a long time, the only one who could not hold on was his Yin's spirit, not his Yang's spirit. Where could the external force come from? Expecting someone to pass by? First of all, this was an extremely low probability. This region was a barren land in history, and no fragments had ever appeared. At such a critical moment, who would come here? Expecting a natural phenomenon? That would be the heavenly Dao opening its eyes. Moreover, this region was empty, and there didn't seem to be any unstable natural phenomena. Expecting a few isolated planets nearby? They were all in the most stable period. If this continued, it would be enough to exhaust an immortal to death. The only glimmer of hope was those two trash. That was if they were willing to sacrifice themselves. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about their mentality. They were unwilling to be ordinary and wanted to end their own lives. As long as Lu Xiaoyi asked, they would definitely do it. If Ji Hao taught them some tricks and used the lives of true lords as the price, they would have a chance to try. However, this thought only flashed through his mind and disappeared in an instant. He wasn't such a person. Even if he won, even if his sect didn't blame him, even if the sword tomb didn't pursue the matter, he wouldn't be able to overcome the hurdle in his heart. He would rather rely on his own strength, regardless of the outcome. People had to have a bottom line and persevere, even if they were a little foolish at times. There was also another way to improve his understanding of the 5 grand essences and chaos. However, how could this be done quickly? Digging out his potential and working hard to refine and deepen what he had learned from the fruit platter was his only way to win. This battle was troublesome. Burned firewood flew alone in the void. He couldn't say that he had a huge demand for these fragments, but it was necessary to do something. This was a concept that cultivators had to have. If you didn't fight for anything, the heavenly Dao's attention would shift away from you. This was because you didn't need it and didn't care. He deliberately avoided the large areas where the anchor chain cultivators were more concentrated. They were landlords, and they were here as ambassadors to build relationships. When fighting for food, they had to pay attention to their table manners. They had to take it easy. Since they had to fight when they saw the fragments, they could only fly to a place with fewer people. They hoped that if they really encountered the fragments, they would be able to withdraw quickly and avoid conflict. They all had the same thought, so they ran to an open area. They wanted to try their luck. There wasn't much difference between popular and non-popular places. They had been out for half a month, so it wasn't strange that they hadn't seen anything. He had a good mentality. He held on to the idea that there was nothing to be gained. This kind of mentality was most suitable for cultivation. For orthodox Taoists like them, they had a good grasp of propriety. Just as he was wandering around leisurely, a faint light appeared in front of him. Burned Firewood's heart skipped a beat. For someone like him who had a supreme background, he could clearly tell that this was a chaos fragment. He didn't expect to be so lucky. He knew that he couldn't startle it, so he slowly approached it. This chaos fragment wasn't fast. It was just at the speed of cruising the universe. It floated aimlessly. Burned Firewood slowly approached from the side, trying his best to control his aura. Just as he was about to enter the range where he could attempt to communicate with it, the chaos fragment suddenly trembled. The next moment, it flashed away. It was so fast that even an essence soul like him couldn't catch up. After chasing it for a while, he had to give up. At this speed, there was no way he could catch up. This was the true essence of the universe's void. It was something close to the Tao. If it wanted to leave, who could stop it? Burnt Firewood was a little depressed. It was fine if he didn't see it. Out of sight, out of mind. However, he couldn't understand why it suddenly ran away when he saw it. It shouldn't be. Chapter 1656. Shards of the Great Path would not hide from people. If that was the case, who could catch them? At the very least, cultivators had a chance to get close to them. At most, they would run away if they could not communicate well, or if they used brute force. It was because of this that Burning Firewood could not understand why it ran away. He had not communicated with it. Moreover, the direction the chaos shard left in was very strange. If it really wanted to avoid him, it should have gone in the opposite direction, but it ran to the side. He took out the star map and compared it to the direction the shard escaped in, but he did not find anything special. In this direction, there were many large and small celestial phenomena, each with their own characteristics, including the no man's land. Did I scare it? Or is there something attracting it? Burning Firewood shook his head and was too lazy to think about it. If it was not his, it was useless to force it. He Qian was fighting with someone. It was not just one person, but a chaotic battle between several people. It involved several realms of the anchor chain. He was here to help because he did not know much about the 5 Grand Masters and chaos. However, he did not know much about them, but some of his senior brothers were good at this, so he came to help. A Taisu shard was seen by several groups of people. Needless to say, it was a battle of fists and feet. This was the eternal melody of the cultivation world. He Qian did not even see the real thing. Because he did not know Taisu, he naturally could not see that this little thing was just a fighter. It was for a strange shard. As they fought, several groups of people suddenly flew in the same direction. He Qian did not know what was going on, and was still entangled with the opponents in front of him. The perfected Lord Naoroa was so angry that he scolded, "You idiot! The thing is running away, and you still want to fight?" He Qian was a little confused. Running away? Then why didn't you chase it? Perfected Lord Naoroa said fiercely, "You guys can't do anything right. It was such a good treasure, yet they had to fight for it. Now it was all for naught." Chase?
How?
The Great Path ran away.
Can you catch it?
Do you think you are chasing a wife? The group of people looked at the shard and sighed. No one chased it because they had experience in this matter. Every time a shard of the Great Path fell, as long as they were startled and ran, they would not stop for several years. With a shard's terrifying speed, where could they find it? Giving up was the wisest choice. Several groups of people grumbled, but there was nothing they could do. After all, the space belonged to everyone, and not just anyone's private plot of land. Why couldn't others have access to it? He could only blame himself for being unlucky. It wasn't as if he hadn't encountered such a situation in the past, but had ended up scaring the shard away because of a fight. Since he had already made a move, how could he control his strength? Those who could see the shards were still fine. They were very careful when they made their moves, afraid that they would startle the shards. However, among the cultivators who were fighting in groups, there were a few who couldn't see the shards at all. It was very likely that they would startle the shards when they made their moves. He was already depressed before the river, so why bother? He came out to help, but he still ended up being blamed. If he had known earlier, he would have followed senior brother Lu. With him around, who could snatch it from him? Lu Xiaoyi was still holding on. More than 10 days had passed. Although the two sides were still in a stalemate and there was no clear trend of victory or defeat, he could already feel that he was in a disadvantageous position. Although it was very small, it was a sign of danger. In the long run, the disadvantageous position would become bigger and bigger until he couldn't struggle anymore. In the end, he would become Lin Jiaxiang. He still didn't want to sacrifice light and back. He didn't even want to think about it. Ever since he lost senior Marshal Brother Guangbei in the Wolf Ridge when he was building his foundation, he understood what a true sword cultivator was. There were some bottom lines that couldn't be crossed. If he crossed them once, it would become logical in the future. He wouldn't be himself anymore, and he wouldn't even be as reckless as that guy in the sword tomb. Meiho Luojia's power seemed to be endless. This was the benefit of worshipping a god. One might fall into blind worship and lose one's understanding of the great Tao, but this thing was really useful. It was real and could be used. It wasn't like those Taoist things, which were shrouded in fog and had to be understood by oneself. Taoist things took a lot of effort so they could reach a higher level. Henghe system was more practical, but its future achievements would be limited. This was the great Tao. Balance was everywhere. His current problem was that the great Tao had balanced everything out. His understanding of the great Tao couldn't be compared with the Henghe people's direct use of power. By now, he had stopped thinking about how to turn the situation around. He started thinking about a life and death struggle. Even if I die, I will break 2 of your teeth. He needed to make a good plan. He needed to go through all his cards and figure out how to break more of Henghe people's teeth. It would be best if he could destroy his path to the upper level. When he decided to fight with his own life, he wouldn't hide it from those 2 anymore. The 3 of them would have a greater chance. This was his way of doing things. He didn't want others to die for him, but when he went to seek death himself, he would bring 2 people with him. This was a must. If he failed, those 2 wouldn't be able to survive either. In this case, why didn't the 3 of them fight with their lives? However, he still needed to wait for a while. When he finished the plan, he would tell them at the last moment so that they wouldn't have to listen to a bunch of bullshit. So be it. He liked straightforward things and didn't like long-winded bitter dramas. Fighting with one's life was a technical job. It wasn't something that could be done by clenching one's teeth and fighting with one's blood. It was a well-planned tactical arrangement. However, in such a tactical arrangement, he didn't need to consider his own safety. He might even sacrifice his own life to achieve a certain effect. Under normal circumstances, fighting with one's life wasn't difficult for him. However, the current environment wasn't normal. He was in someone else's territory. When fighting against Meiho Roja's power, there were many uncertainties that he needed to consider and make a choice. He still knew too little about Henghe system. What he knew was mostly about the few main gods. However, there were so many fart gods in Henghe system that even local people might not know all of them, not to mention him, who didn't belong to this world at all. While Lu Xiaoyi was carefully preparing, a slight change occurred. He raised his head confusedly. Was he not sure? Was it an outsider? Not likely. Normal monarchs couldn't break in. And no monarch would be so stupid as to break in, knowing full well that it was a death trap. The aura seemed strange. It didn't seem human, but it had perfectly merged with the chaos space. If he didn't have a great sense of Tao, he wouldn't even be able to find it. In the next moment, Lu Xiaoyi curved his mouth corners in a grin. Holy sh**t. The heavens didn't destroy him. He wanted to sleep, but here came his pillow. Chapter 1657. A great Tao fragment had entered. A grand supreme fragment. Lu Xiaoyi easily guessed why it had come here. He had to thank the revered High Priest Lidic Khan for this. Without his ultimate chaotic form, how could Lu Xiaoyi have such a chance? He had not encountered a fragment for several hundred years. This was a simple principle. Wealth came from danger. As he slowly moved toward the fragment, Lu Xiaoyi was not worried that someone would snatch it from him. The people outside could not enter, and the 2 cripples could not see it. Lidic Khan did not really need it. Perhaps he would fight with him, but the outcome of such a fight was already decided. Why Grand Supreme? He did not know either. There was no doubt that it would be helpful to his growth in the Tao realm, but it would be even better if it was chaos. He could not be picky. The heavens were not unkind to him, giving him a hand in the face of life and death. He could not ask for too much. He was satisfied. Because he could sense this grand supreme fragment, he knew that his understanding of the five grand Taos had already reached a higher level. At the very least, he had obtained the recognition of the Great Tao. He had plenty of time, so he decided to use a more conventional method to collect this grand supreme fragment. He would not be like before, sweeping it into Sparrow Palace and slowly subduing it. In the past, he had plenty of time to slowly train it, but what he needed now was a thorough understanding. He could not act like before. This was the last chance that the heavens had given him. He had to grasp it carefully and not be rash. The heavenly Tao would not give a second chance to those who did not cherish it. Grand simplicity, grand beginning, grand supreme, grand simplicity, grand ultimate. Now there was a grand supreme in the middle. It was somewhat troublesome. He slowly extended his mental feelers. He was very experienced in interacting with this little thing and knew that he could not rush things. The principle of contact from the beginning was to not touch its core and not alarm it. Of course, he also had a backup plan. If it really wanted to run, his Sparrow Palace could send it over at any time, making it impossible for it to escape. The situation was not bad. Although the fragment was somewhat wary and felt that this person was putting on airs and harboring ill intentions, it was not to the point of running away. It stayed where it was and watched his performance. Lu Xiaoyi's coaxing and pestering was actually to express that he had no malicious intentions. After a period of time, when he felt that the time was ripe, Lu Xiaoyi was ready to throw out his views on the Great Path, hoping to get the fragment's approval. This was a very important step. Only when both sides reached a partial agreement in their understanding of Genesis Supreme would the fragment willingly follow the human cultivator. This process was like a marriage proposal. One would have to kneel down to express one's attitude, hand over the ring, and then say a bunch of sweet nothings to see if they had anything in common. Just when Lu Xiaoyi was about to get to the main point, he sensed something else. This time, due to his previous experience, he knew that another fragment of the ways had barged in. Moreover, it had sensed the existence of the Grand Prime fragment, so it had made its way here. It was an absolute beginning fragment. The two fragments had successfully joined forces. Because they were of the same origin, they were closer to each other. As they intertwined with each other, they galloped happily. Lu Xiaoyi was not in a hurry to collect it now, because he had already seen clearly that Lidic Khan's chaotic state had an extraordinary attraction to the fifth Grand Prime fragment within a certain range. Since there were already two fragments of the ways of the Great Path, there was naturally the possibility of a third or fourth fragment appearing, until the fifth Grand Prime was reunited. The most anticipated thing was, would it attract a fragment of the Grand Simplicity fragment that had already collapsed hundreds of years ago? As the two fragments flew up and down, they naturally evolved the true essence of the Tao. After Grand Primordial was Grand Supreme, and before Grand Primordial was Grand Primordial. The Tao realms between them were very closely connected, connecting the previous and the following, continuing and merging. While waiting, Lu Xiaoyi also joined in their dance, pretending to be Grand Simplicity and Essence Supreme. He was not a fragment of the ways of the Great Path, so there was definitely a gap in knowledge between the two fragments. Thus, he was often despised by the two fragments and was always the one that was dealt with together. The most important thing was the attitude. Although the two fragments did not agree with his shallow knowledge, they did not reject such a shameless and pestering fellow. They could feel the attitude of a living being towards the Great Path. No matter if his knowledge was right or wrong, deep or shallow, the most important thing was his persistence towards the exploration of the Great Path. Slowly, they accepted him. However, they would never accept Lidic Khan's hand of friendship, because as the purest Tao concept, they would never accept a so-called god, no matter who he was. There was no coexistence. Innate Taos would never compromise on this point. Slowly, there were new members dancing in the space. Tai Chi, Essence Supreme, and the Chaos Fragment entered one after another and joined them. The dance turned into a group dance. Lu Xiaoyi could only pretend to be Grand Simplicity now. This was also the one that he had spent the longest time on, and the one that he had the deepest understanding of. Even so, the group dance was very uncoordinated. Because there was an existence that could never hit the dance spot, either stepping on Genesis Supreme's foot or hitting Chaos waist. He had no choice but to accept everyone's criticism. All kinds of criticism. All kinds of criticism. But Lu Xiaoyi's attitude was good. He nodded and bowed, accepted with an open mind, and turned over a new leaf. This made it difficult for these Dao seeds to kick such an existence out. In the end, the group dance finally became something, and he was finally considered to have truly integrated into it. After the 5 Dao fragments acknowledged him, the fragments also discovered his problem and began to take the initiative to help him solve the problem of resisting the godly power. Lu Xiaoyi declined. To a cultivator, what kind of character was the most important in the process of cultivation? Was it contentment or greed? Was it to leave a line for the heavens and stop while he was ahead? Or was it to be unforgiving and want to eat a fatty in one bite? Actually, there was no conclusion. It depended on the environment, the situation, and luck. On this point, Lu Xiaoyi was more inclined to the mentality of a gambler. When luck came, if you were not greedy, then when would you be able to turn over a new leaf? He had lost half his life in the gambling den, and now that he finally had a chance to win, if he did not raise his stakes, he would not be able to live up to his identity as a gambler. Therefore, he was not in a hurry to accept the help of the fragments, waiting for Grand Simplicity's arrival. A family had to be reunited. It did not make sense that everyone was here, but only Grand Simplicity had not arrived. If he won, he had to win to his heart's content. He had to achieve the result of the sun god lying down and Lu Xiaoyi eating his fill. Only then would he be in a good mood and have a clear mind. Happiness that was not built on the pain of others was not true happiness. A swordsman had to look like a sword. Therefore, even if the pressure of Lidic Khan's godly power was getting stronger and stronger, to the point where he could not bear it, he would bet on his luck and wait for Grand Simplicity's arrival. Chapter 1658. Lidic Khan had transformed into Meho Roha's ultimate chaotic state. When he was in this state, all the grudges of the mortal world had already left him. As long as he still had these thoughts, his chaotic state would never be perfect. This was the basic principle. How could the upper realm be thinking about those trivial matters? In his current chaotic state, he could clearly feel the threat from the great Dao fragment. But it was also an opportunity. In his current state, he was less sharp in battle, but more sensitive to the Dao. He knew that under such circumstances, he had to deal with this person as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fortunately, this person didn't have a Dao fragment yet. Was it a scheme? Or was it impossible? But his intuition told him that he was in danger, so he increased the pressure on the swordsman. What was supposed to be a surefire upper realm kill was now full of problems. This swordsman's ability to cause trouble was truly amazing. If he could go back to the past, if he could start all over again, he doubted if he would still choose to deal with this super troublesome guy. Under the increasing pressure, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly raised his head, and a smile appeared on his face. A fragment had intruded. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it was the summon of a big family, but this Tai fragment that had been drifting alone in the void of the universe for hundreds of years had finally returned. Finally, the whole family was gathered together. The cornerstone of the universe was also gathered. Lu Xiaoyi opened his heart, let go of his Naiwen, and merged with the fragment. Lidic Khan was a little stunned, because a few more fragments had suddenly appeared in the space. Not only were they the Cosmos 5 manifestations and primal chaos, there seemed to be other Dao fragments as well. Impermanence? Void? Slaughter? And one of them was actually merit? Where did these things come from? What was even more terrifying was that these fragments kept coming in and out. Sometimes he could sense 10 fragments dancing outside, and sometimes he could only sense 3 or 4. Where did the rest go? Sometimes he couldn't even sense a single fragment. Where did they go? In his chaotic state, was there anywhere that could escape his senses? There was only one place, the Naiwen Palace of a human cultivator, the Sea of Consciousness.
Trouble. Danger.
Big trouble. He had encountered a freak. Lu Xiaoyi felt satisfied as the fragments around him swam around happily, surrounding his little universe. And he was a fragment collector. Let me introduce them. They all have names. This is Little Void, this is Little Gong. You should also have names. Taichu, you can be called Little Rough, and Taisher, you can be called Little Wet. Everyone, take your positions. The time has come. I'm going to show my might. Fragment into Niwen, Universe Galaxy Transformation. After a short period of silence, a sudden change occurred. The entire chaotic form began to undergo mysterious changes. The clear and turbid qi, which had faintly taken shape, began to merge once again. The Tai Chi was no longer there, returning to the primal chaos. This was the reverse of history, but it was a reverse of the past. Under the pure power of the innate Tao, no one could stop it, not even the gods.
But this wasn't the end.
Following that, the primal chaos body began to melt. The grand essence that was originally transformed into a primal chaos state was now pushed out from the primal chaos state of Raja Mo Throat God to the grand essence state. In Lu Xiaoyi's sea of consciousness, the fragments were giving him pointers. Infinity is Tai Chi. Infinity Void Chi is the essence. Tai Chi Void Chi is the essence. Yin and Yang are separated into heaven and earth. Without the universe's Chi giving birth to form, there is already the universe's Qi. From form to Qi, it is called Yin and Yang. From Qi, it is called Tai Chi. Tai Chi Yuan Qi contains three as one, establishing the Tao of heaven, the Tao of earth, and the Tao of man. It is called the Tao of three talents, the movement of the six lines, the Tao of three extremes. This was the Tai Chi fragments competing. The chaotic one says that all things are chaotic, but not separated. See not, hear not, follow not. Thus it is called E. Changeable is formless. Changeable is one. One changeable is seven. Seven changeable is nine. Nine transformations, in the end, are repeated transformations into one. First, the beginning of the transformation. The clear and light is heaven. The turbid Qi is earth, and the harmonious Qi is man. Thus, heaven and earth contain essence, and all things are born. This was the primal chaos being long-winded. Taisher, the form is instantaneous. Yin and Yang intersect, mixing into one, giving birth to form from one. Although it has form, it does not have substance. In the primal chaos of the fragments, the throat god of Raja Mo was changed into the Taisher state, followed by the Taichu state, and finally into the silent Tai state. At this point, Ridichin's throat god of Raja Mo's form was pushed to the bottom. The form here had nothing to do with him, the initiator, and in this process, Ridichin could only watch helplessly. He did not have the ability to interfere at all. In the face of the purest Tao state power in the universe, any kind of divine power was useless. They were not on the same level. It was not over yet. After the reversal, the surrounding space went from Tai-I to Taichu, Taisher, Taisu, Primal Chaos, and Tai Chi. Ridichin sadly realized that from the form, the clear and turbid Qi had finally taken form. However, this had nothing to do with him. This was someone else's clear and turbid Qi, not his. He was actually inexplicably eliminated in the process of his upper realm. It had nothing to do with him. It had become someone else's. The two useless people felt at the moment the throat god of Raja Mo started to reverse. This was intuition. It must be Junior Brother's doing. Oh no. It must be a counterattack. How can we help him? Back shouted. Light illumination was much more clear-headed than him. Help? Do you have the ability? Just don't add more trouble to it. Let nature take its course. This is a good opportunity for us. If you don't know how to make use of it, why are you still cultivating? Why are you still practicing the sword? The two of them no longer resisted. Instead, they tried their best to integrate into the changes. They might not know the reason for doing so, but they did not lack the motivation to do so. Through the changes of the five ties, they changed their bodies. Even if it was passive, inexplicable, even if it became worse, how bad could it be compared to now? This was the change that Lu Xiaoyi was manipulating. It would definitely not harm them. This kind of mentality was the basic mentality of a primordial spirit cultivator. If they did not gamble now, when would they? Previously, they were a little desperate because they knew that there was no possibility of their bodies recovering completely. Now, it was different. Who did not have the desire to survive against the heavens? When their forms changed into the Tai state, the two of them almost turned into two balls of dead silence. However, they persevered through it. Thus, the bitter was over and the sweet was coming. It could not be said to be reborn, but it was an extremely important opportunity for their bodies to recover. Following the changes in their forms, they also became stronger and stronger. Slowly, they turned from useless people to slightly useful people. Then, they gradually began to recover their previous strength. If they could perfectly persevere to the end, it would be a leap to a new level for them. Chapter 1659. Lu Xiaoyi first removed its roots, then took its shape. With one reverse and one upright, he completely shattered the foundation of Hung, He-Man's upper realm. At this moment, he felt that he had reached a very important juncture. Nascent divinity was already within his reach. This was actually his main purpose. As the saying goes, strike while the iron is hot and finish everything in one go. Especially in the world of cultivation, when you feel it, you must not delay, hide, or study it. Then consider whether you have prepared enough. Do you have enough spiritual devices? Is the environment safe? When you have thought it through, you will miss the opportunity and your luck will be gone. What can you do? He had been waiting for these 6 great Daos for more than 500 years, but he never thought that he would get 6 great Daos. The 6 great Daos had arrived, and the great Daos had been delivered to his mouth. What could he do? When the final Tai Chi form was formed, the clear air was above and the turbid air was below. The entire space had become his world. Only the consciousness of Lidic Khan, who was staring at him covetously and enviously, was still hiding in a corner. Lidic Khan's current state was one where he could neither ascend nor descend. He could only see the swordsman's big mouth in the middle. He couldn't go back. His Meiho Rogia form was composed of 2 parts. The first part was Meiho Rogia's divine power, and the other part was the chaos. But now, the chaos was taken away by someone else, turned over and over again, and suffered a great pain from the inside out. Therefore, the chaos was no longer his power. Because he had lost half of his form, only the divinity was left. He didn't dare to recklessly interfere, and he had to be careful even when he wanted to do something bad. He was afraid that this swordsman would take things too hard and stop ascending first. Instead, he would use him as an example. He could only endure, pretend to be docile, pretend to be scared, and wait for the chance to appear in the process of ascending. For a cultivator, destroying one's cultivation path was like killing one's parents. How could he forget? His only answer was to destroy this person's upper realm as well. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to dispel this person's hatred. Lu Xiaoyi's method of attaining nascent divinity was completely different from the Taoist methods. In fact, after he attained nascent soul, all of his upper realms were different. There were no precedents, no methods. If one didn't understand, one had to rely on words. If one understood, words wouldn't. This was the normal process of ascending, but now, he couldn't even rely on words. The only thing he could rely on was his deeper understanding of the universe. Although he could only do it himself, his goal was clear. Once the goal was set, it would be carried out immediately. He would not waste time killing Li Taikan at this time. Compared with his cultivation, Hengyi Yang's spirit was nothing. Will's is nascent divinity form is. The divinity's nascence divinity's divinity form divinity. Divinity. Simply put, when a cultivator perfectly combined his divinity with his body, he would reach the nascent divinity realm. From then on, the divinity he cultivated would be divinity yang. Lu Xiaoyi's divinity had been polished for a long time. In the Taoist cognition system, if the divinity wasn't strong enough, it wouldn't be strong enough after fusion. If the divinity was too full and the barrier was hard to break, it was very contradictory. Therefore, timing was very important. It didn't mean that the longer one stayed in the divinity realm, the more confident he would be in ascending to the next realm. There was a limit to this. But he didn't have to think about these problems because, as a small universe, he had to follow the rhythm of the big universe. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about strengthening his divinity. He didn't care about the barrier. Anyway, everything could be decided by the changes of the small universe. If he wanted the divinity to merge with his body, he had to first teach the divinity the foundation of 3 souls and 7 spirits. There were 3 souls in Madame's body. One was fetus light, the qi of Taiqing Yang, one was Shuangling, the qi of Yin, and one was Yujing, the qi of Yin. The first soul, fetus light, belonged to the heavens. It often wanted to be with the living to prolong one's life. It wanted to stay in the human body for a long time and was ready for Tao. The second soul, Shuangling, belonged to the 5 elements. It often wanted to control the human body and the myriad of things. It wanted to control the 100 gods and bring about many disasters. The third soul, Yujing, belonged to the earth. It often wanted people to be lustful and addicted to lust. It was filthy and dark, delaying sleep. Shuangling wanted people to be alive. Life made the heart tired. When the heart tired, it made the 100 gods work. When the 100 gods worked, the qi would disperse. The 3 souls are indeterminate. The refreshing spirit floats. The fetus light takes shape. The serene spirit calls. Hence the saying, Tai Wei Xian Palace, Yu Huang Shi Qing, refines the 3 souls. The fetus light is peaceful. The divine treasure jade room is born with me. Do not act rashly. The examiner is too smart if you want to fly. After refining the 3 souls, there were still the 7 spirits. The first spirit was named Corpse Dog. The second spirit was named Concealed Arrow. The third spirit was named Sparrow-een. The fourth spirit was named Seizing Thief. The fifth spirit was named Non-Poison. The sixth spirit was named Filth Removal. The seventh spirit was named Smelly Lung. Lu Xiaoyi guarded his heart and focused on imparting his soul. All of this had its own little universe. For a Yin master of his level, it wasn't something that required much effort. He just had to follow the order and impart his soul. Finally, it was time for the spirits to enter the body. The sun scattered its splendor. The drooping purple and green light entered my soul, illuminating my 5 forms, but the ghost tested my heart. The heavenly light came and went. The 6 embryos were connected. The 3 souls guarded the spirit. The 7 spirits did not die, bearing the sun and crying, together with the sun god. The soul essence, the soul spirit, the 9 heavens were born together. The stone-seen jellyfish. The moon was bright, wandering the moon palace, smelting the golden court. The 2 scenes combined. The auspicious time was clear. The 8 meeting belt. I am willing to succeed. In this process, because of more than 500 years of continuous polishing, the Yin master was very tough. Hence, the spiritual opportunity required for imparting the spirits was unusually large. He could only use the purple purity. This kind of energy problem could not be solved easily. He was very rich. All these years, he only had income and no expenditure. But even so, he could not make ends meet. He felt powerless. He was not worried, because he was in the void, and because of the special characteristics of his little universe, he could capture the purple purity and jade purity in the surrounding space under special circumstances. This was the only ability of his little universe body. He could not abuse it. He could only try it when he was in the most difficult upper realm. The body of his little universe was useless? No, just this was the path of the infinite upper realm. How could there be a second cultivation technique in the world that could compare? Lidic Khan saw an opportunity. He was very clear that he, who had lost his body, could no longer perform any forbidden techniques to stop the swordsman. In the form of an incarnation, he had given up the means of a cultivator and entrusted everything to the essence of the great Tao. Therefore, he could not use the vision of a cultivator to destroy this. Without a body, all the skills he had learned were useless. Just like how the swordsman's sword was useless here. Therefore, he could only watch and wait, hoping for an opportunity to use his divine power. Lu Xiaoyi's lack of strength was an opportunity. He wanted to use his little universe body to restrain the spiritual opportunity in the surrounding space. This was not in the category of the Great Tao. Therefore, Meho Roja's divine power could stop him. Without the source of spiritual opportunity, let's see what he could use to reach the upper realm. He had to pay the price for strengthening his Yin master. Chapter 1660. The small universe revolved, but the spiritual opportunity did not arrive. Lu Xiaoyi felt danger. It went without saying who did it, and there was no other possibility. This guy was able to wait until now to make a move. He was very persistent, and the timing was really good. He had hit his sore spot. Energy was a hurdle that could never be bypassed in the upper realm. It was a cornerstone that could not be exploited. Especially in the void of the universe, one could only die of thirst in the upper realm if one did not have the help of one's teacher or fellow disciples. As expected of the young god, he was steady, accurate, and ruthless. There was not much time left for Lu Xiaoyi. The spiritual energy in his storage ring was decreasing at a visible rate. What other source of spiritual energy did he have? The two swordsmen were a source, but they also used a lot of spiritual energy to repair themselves. It was completely unpredictable. The two of them were very far away from the Yang God realm, so it was impossible for them to prepare much. The key was that Lu Xiaoyi had an even more vicious idea. This chaotic form, well, it had now become a Tai Chi form. In fact, it was also a variation of energy. It was a part of Lidic Khan's huge energy. Since it was energy, of course it could be used, but it needed a certain amount of conversion. He was not unfamiliar with these methods, and there was a group of fragments giving him ideas. He completely cut off the idea of the Hengyi Yang God. As for what would happen to the people of Hengyi after swallowing this energy, only God knew. It was not something he should think about. Under the supply of a huge amount of energy, primordial qi was gradually born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial qi was born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial qi was born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial qi was born. Primordial qi was a new term that could only be obtained after a cultivator reached the primordial spirit realm. However, there were also Taoist sects that regarded it as an upgraded, strengthened, and refined version of supernatural power. Everyone had their own opinions, but in any case, this was a new chapter. Lidic Khan's consciousness was silent in the depths of his mind. He was not moved by the loss of his chaotic energy body. It was not that he did not feel pity or heartache, but he knew that this kind of negative emotion was of no use to him now. He had long known that cutting off the cosmic spiritium around him would not have much of an effect, because his massive chaos form was right there, and there was no way his opponent could not see it. There were still some flaws in his research on this chaotic form. He originally thought that he could solve this flaw by killing the upper realm, but he didn't expect that he would end up in a dead end. For a young spirit like him, his state of mind had reached a certain height. He would not regret what had happened in the past. He would only plan for what would happen in the future. The past was the past.
There was no point in dwelling on it.
His problem was, how is he going to reconstruct his body? Before, if Lu Xiaoyi didn't touch this chaos power, he would be in a difficult situation. He would need to slowly turn this chaos power into his own, then merge with the Moho Roja's divine head and return to his human shape. This process was completely uncontrollable. It was impossible for such a huge sphere of energy to exist without being noticed by others forever. If he wanted to regain control of the chaos power, he would need a lot of time. It might even take years or even decades. This made the process full of variables. He would definitely be discovered by cultivators passing by. Perhaps the three swordsmen would not let him go. They would use all kinds of methods to disturb him. How could he have the chance to do this? This was the result he had to avoid, because if he did this, he would become a target floating in the universe. Countless malicious intents would swarm toward him until he was completely destroyed. As a young spirit, he was being tortured like this in the void, like watching a clown. He could not stand it. Therefore, the real reason why he cut off the swordsman's spiritual spiritium was to force the swordsman to swallow this chaotic energy body. He would lose a large part of his power, but at the same time, he would regain his freedom. He would have a pure body of Moho Roha's divine power, which would allow him to continue in the future. This was to cut off his tail to survive. The swordsman's upper realm was unstoppable. After becoming a nascent spirit, he would be even more terrifying. Lidic Khan no longer had the confidence to fight. As for the oath, he had already made it the first time he was beheaded. This was another benefit of being reborn as a young spirit. Since he had already been killed once, he naturally had to break the previous contract. This was in accordance with the rules of the cultivation world. He would return in the form of a pure Moho Roha. Because of the purity of his divine power, it would not be too difficult for him to break away. When the swordsman finished absorbing the chaotic energy, there might be a small chance that he would be beheaded by the swordsman again, but it would only be once at most. He had only been beheaded 3 times in total, so how could the swordsman see through his true foundation? In the beginning of the upper realm, a cultivator was not suited for battle. He needed to adapt to all kinds of things, and it was impossible for him to control his new self freely. This was an opportunity. This was Lidic Khan's plan. While he was plotting against the swordsman, he was also planning for his own life. The swordsman had too many secrets. Space travel, 10 fragments in the mud ball, these were all first-hand secrets. He wanted to send these back to the Hung River realm so that the next time they met, the Hung River realm would not hesitate to send their strongest forces to deal with this terrifying opponent. He could not be careless anymore. He could not let the swordsman grow into a young spirit. If he did, would there be a way for others to survive? Lu Xiaoyi mustered all his strength and absorbed the chaotic energy with all his might to nourish his own nascent spirit. This was already the last stage of forming the nascent spirit, the last crucial step. There was no quantitative standard for how much chaotic energy he had to absorb, and there was no such thing as absorbing the entire chaotic energy to satisfy the needs of the upper realm nascent spirit. But for a cultivator, they had to absorb all the chaotic energy during this period of time. No one would leave a mouthful of energy outside. This was the momentum. But Lidic Khan just had to meet such a person. This bastard clearly had the ability to absorb the chaotic energy, but he did not do so. Instead, he left a clump of energy. It was like eating a pancake with a piece left, or eating a watermelon with a tooth left. At this moment, the void cleared, and the chaotic energy was gone. The 3 of them faced each other in the sky, and there was still a clump of energy in the corner. Lu Xiaoyi was proud and full of affection as he recited in the air, "My nascent spirit has reached the great success stage. My mother often beat me, but I don't know how hard it is to cultivate. Words of love should be self-encouragement, but old habits are hard to break. I don't know the deep meaning, but I don't want the dog to leave leftovers." Some flatterers cheered loudly, "Good poem, good poem. The meaning is profound, and it will last forever. Fellow Taoist, your nascent spirit has reached the great success stage. The sword tomb bearer congratulates junior brother." Lu Xiaoyi gladly accepted it, not knowing what modesty was. He only stared at the clump of energy, and his eyes gradually turned cold. "Wanna run? You'll have to eat my sword. If I can't kill you, it's because I don't have the ability. If I kill you, don't blame the Xianyuan people." Chapter 1661. As soon as his voice faded, Lu Xiaoyi pursed his lips and sucked in the remaining energy form. To him, this was something that he could do without. Lidic Sweat didn't want to waste any more time, and neither did he. How could a swordsman be so slow when killing someone? As soon as the last energy form disappeared, a Moho Roha immortal image with a human body and a snake head appeared out of thin air. At the same time, 3 sword lights flew out. One of them was like a chaotic light, giving Lidic Sweat a taste of his own medicine. It was a future with no choice, only a target. One sword strike in the past, nearly 100 times in the past, it was hard to tell the real from the fake. However, the sword light didn't hesitate at all, only slashing at a staggering old bull in one of the past. Its body was covered in dust, but it couldn't hide its white fur and the huge tumor on its back. The three sword lights slashed down at the same time, accompanied by a long sigh, and an extremely majestic Tao vanishing phenomenon appeared out of thin air. Light and Piggyback stepped forward together. They were about to congratulate, but they were stopped by someone with a pretentious face.
Slow down.
I'm going to recite a poem to congratulate the upper realm. The two were speechless. Piggyback was curious. Didn't Junior Brother already recite it? I think it's pretty good. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the sky. That's a limerick to piss off that Hengi man. I have to think of a poem that's truly worthy of me, a grand one. This is something that will be written in my biography in the future. I can't be careless. The two waited, but they had to satisfy this person's perverted interests, who knew that after waiting for a long time, they still couldn't come up with anything. Light yelled, "Enough. Stop putting on an act. With your little ink, you can only write a limerick. What are you pretending for?" Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Indeed, he couldn't write one. All the good upper realm poems had been written by Crow ancestor, so he couldn't copy them. He looked at Piggyback and sized him up. There's one more. You've completely recovered? And you seem to have improved a little? Are you still not convinced? I'll give you a chance, while my upper realm is still unstable. This is a rare opportunity. Dai Hui sighed. I'm convinced. I have cultivated the sword for countless years, and I have never submitted to anyone, including my senior brothers in the sword tomb. However, my sword skills compared to junior brothers is like a firefly compared to the stars. I can't compare at all. I've already told junior brother Guangyao that I'm going to travel with him and then return to Xianyuan. As a guest cultivator, I'll see if I can become Xuanyuan's in-name disciple and learn Xuanyuan's mid-range and long-range attacks. Previously, I was rash and almost caused junior apprentice Brother Guangyao to return to his position. My heart is really uneasy. Lu Xiaoyi looked at light illumination. This is senior brother's matter. It's not my place to interfere. Senior martial brother, you can decide for yourself. He understood what his senior brother meant. Deep down, he still wanted to help Xianyuan find a powerful ally, especially since they were both from the Sword Dao lineage. That was why he didn't mention their previous grudges. One had to know that this wasn't a trivial grudge. This was a life and death grudge. If he hadn't coincidentally met Lu Xiaoyi's rebellion against the Five Ties, even if he was still alive, he would have completely lost the chance to reach the upper realm. No matter how open-minded a swordsman was, he wouldn't be so open-minded to the point where he could easily let go of someone who wanted to kill him. This could only mean that this senior brother valued the general situation and the interests of the sect more than himself. This was a kind of quality. Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to interfere, but that didn't mean that he wouldn't use other methods. He never hid his suspicions, because this was the only way to prevent those who were doubted from suspecting him. You're so sneaky. Who knows what you're thinking? I'm too lazy to guess. However, I'm worried about you. Where's your home? If I have the chance, I'll pay a visit to your family. I, Xianyuan, can't accept someone for no reason and not explain it to the master of the sect. Dazzling light sighed. This junior brother was even more ruthless. Not only did he want to accept one person, he wanted to accept a whole nest of them and wipe them all out. However, these words were said so openly, and it didn't make people feel disgusted. This was the art of speech, and even more so, the art of being a person. This junior brother was able to do so well in the universe, not only because of his swordsmanship, but also because of the way he conducted himself. When you use the truth instead of lies to achieve your goal, it is a whole new level of communication. Dazzling Light was ashamed of his inferiority on this point. Other than being a little older, he wasn't fit to call anyone junior brother. There wasn't anything wrong with it. To a demon, other than adapting, what else could you do? Shi Huai raised his head and made a decision. Swordsmen didn't judge people by the length of time. The establishment of trust was often in an instant. This was the feeling that Lu Xiaoyi gave him. He was ruthless, tyrannical, and merciless. He destroyed Dazzling Light, and this guy immediately turned around and destroyed him. He was the epitome of a swordsman who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. However, his ruthlessness didn't make people feel disgusted. He also didn't have a lofty and arrogant personality. The feeling he gave was that even if they couldn't become friends, they could entrust their lives to each other. Ever since I came to the origin world 300 years ago, I've never revealed my sect to anyone. However, junior brother Lu, you're the first person I'm willing to tell. Because I believe that the senior brothers of the Sword Catacomb will definitely be willing to meet you. I only have one request. No matter what junior brother says, just don't let them capture me. It's not easy to come out, and I still haven't strolled around enough. The three of them walked together and didn't mention a single word about Lytic Khan. This was because from the beginning to the end, the two cripples had seen everything. They had their own judgments from their own point of view. If Lu Xiaoyi explained, it would definitely be from his own ability. It might be suitable for him, but it might not be suitable for others. Instead, it would be easy for others to misunderstand. An important core concept was that there couldn't be only one way to solve a problem. Therefore, if the same problem was given to different cultivators to solve, then there would definitely be different methods. You only needed to find the one that was most suitable for you. What did other people do have to do with you? Guang Yao changed the topic. Junior brother, these people from Hung River are really hateful. They're using the characteristics of us swordsmen to achieve their own goals. Extremely treacherous. Extremely cunning. As a young spirit, he disregarded the convention and acted on his own accord. If we expose his actions, it will definitely ruin the anchor chain's reputation. What do you think? However, Lu Xiaoyi had a different opinion. I don't think so. Even if we ruin the reputation of Hung River, it doesn't mean that those domains will definitely side with the fifth ring. This isn't a choice between two, there are many choices. Personally, I think that their performance in the miniature scene already eliminated them. It's just that no one expressed it. There's no need for us to add fuel to the fire and force the anchor chain to make a choice. The main point of a diplomatic mission is to not be overbearing. You can kill people quickly, but it's best to be clumsy with your words. The people of the anchor chain understand that they have their own plans. You don't need to worry about them. Chapter 1662. Light Illumination nodded, agreeing with his junior brother's judgment. Then, we don't need to deal with the remaining Hung River cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi smiled coldly. They're just some rotten fish and shrimps. Killing them will only alert the people of Hung River. There's no other meaning. What we need is a final decision, not a piece of cake. Light Illumination roughly understood what he meant. Going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Under the support of the Battle of Domains, they must not use too much force. If they were too conspicuous, the fifth ring would be besieged by all the external forces. They had to have a sense of propriety and trust in the eyes of the anchor chain. Things should stop at a certain point. The fifth ring had already shown what they should do, so there was no need to force the anchor chain to make a decision. If the anchor chain really made a decision, not only would the hostility of Hung River's Light, Fu Qian, and the Buddhists become more obvious, even Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice, who originally had a good impression of each other, would become distant. This was a very subtle psychology. It would be better to do nothing from now on and live a carefree life. We can build a good relationship with Fu Qian and Heaven's Choice. This is our next goal. The two chatted freely, but Bactri was not interested in these trivial matters. It was not that he was pure as a swordsman, but that he lived a simple life. His sect also never participated in the chaos of the universe, living a detached life. Light Illumination said softly, "Junior brother, is the matter in Dutian settled?" Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "It's done.
So I'm going to Dutian.
Clean up the mess. This kind of thing can't be hidden, because the truth won't be hidden forever. Zhai Xing and the others are not kind people. They might throw out the truth when facing Jing. I have to take the initiative." Bactri probably knew what he had done before, so he laughed. "Admit your mistake after killing someone? Junior brother, you have guts." But Dutian is full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. There should be at least 7 or 8 young gods, right? Why don't we go with you? We can cover for you. Light Illumination nodded. That's right. Junior brother, don't be arrogant. Taoist young gods cannot be underestimated. One doesn't matter, but if there are several, who can guarantee that they can escape unscathed? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. We're not going to fight. There was another reason. It's not good for too many people to go. It'll make us look guilty, and it'll be meaningless. Light is different from Fu Chen. They are a potential threat to us. Therefore, we must plant a thorn between them and Dutian. This was not a matter of using force. You don't have to worry about my safety. At worst, I'll just enter the dimensional space. There won't be any danger. Brilliant Light was a little impulsive when it involved himself, but when it involved others, he was very thoughtful. It's indeed inappropriate to follow you into the metropolis realm, and it might affect your plans. However, it's also wrong to completely ignore it. We have to have a plan to deal with the unknown. How about this? The two of us will find a place outside the Dutian realm and wait for you. If anything happens, you can run in this direction. If the 3 of us join forces, we won't be able to kill a few young gods, but we can still escape on our own. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't refuse, so he could only agree. You're not looking for fragments anymore? The fragments may recognize us, but we can't recognize them. Since we're not fated, what's the point of looking for them? The 3 of them went straight to Dutian. During this time, Brilliant Light gave Lu Xiaoyi a good overview of Dutian's current situation, including the characteristics of the orthodoxy, the attitude of the forces, and the structure of the cultivators. This was also the effort that the 7 of them had to put into the anchor chain for 100 years. In the heavenly eye, a light was extinguished. That was the light of a young god. Even in the entire universe, it wasn't a very ordinary existence. It was the top of the cultivation world. A Taoist true immortal's consciousness transmitted. This is the second person, right? The first person he killed was also a Yin god, and now it's a Yang god. Everyone is like this. In the long run, the heavenly eye doesn't need to do anything, and internal strife will cause it to fall apart. I think he should be severely punished. A true Buddha of Buddhism said, I second that. When the heavenly eye was first established, the inner scroll was the first precept. This child has violated the precepts time and time again. If we don't stop him, we won't be able to restrain him in the future. Monk Minghui and Rictic Khan were both people of the heavenly eye. Lu Xiaoyi had killed them. To him, this was a matter of course, but the upper echelons of the heavenly eye clearly didn't think so. Lord Numinous Treasure's consciousness was distant. My numinous treasure race shouldn't interfere in the affairs of you humans. In history, I have never crossed the line. However, I don't have any dissent. It's not that I'm trying to protect myself or not asking about the heavenly eye, but that the 2 of you have always been fair and impartial, upholding the law. I have no reason to interrupt. However, since the collapse of the Great Tao and the restart of the epoch, why do I feel that the attitudes of the 2 of you have changed? Are you no longer the 2 selfless rulers from before? Have you become calculative, not caring about right and wrong, and only looking at appearances? The reason you said is something that the cultivators of the mortal world can say. With your status and ability, can you say it? The primordial beast god sneered. The first time they killed a comrade of the heavenly eye was the mission you sent. You sent people to face each other in the mortal world, but you blame them for killing each other. I don't understand this strange reason. If we really talk about killing each other, don't we need to investigate further and see which ruler was behind it, placing the 2 heavenly eye cultivators on opposite sides in the mission? This time, the killing was clearly caused by the Hung River cultivator, who was an upper-level cultivator, having the intention to kill and setting up the anchor chain. In the end, he was caught in his own trap and brought about his own death. Yet you blame the victim? When 2 people face each other, it's very important whether they understand each other's identities. The Hung River cultivator entered the heavenly eye for 2,000 years, while the 5-ring swordsman only entered for a few hundred years. The difference in their understanding of the heavenly eye is like heaven and earth. Why don't we do it now and see if the two of them know each other's identities before the battle? If the swordsman doesn't know, he's not guilty. If he knows, he'll bear part of the responsibility. If the Hung River cultivator doesn't know, this is a personal action. If he knows, he's doing it on purpose and deserves to die. Are the two rulers willing to give it a try? The Lord of Numinous Treasures only expressed his dissent, but the archaic beast deity's words were very blunt and went straight to the heart of the matter. The two human true immortals didn't dare to take the bait. They had extraordinary abilities and were well aware of the truth. How would they dare to investigate further? They didn't know whether the swordsman knew, but the Hung River Yang god definitely knew. Therefore, the crime of killing his comrades probably couldn't be pinned on the swordsman. At the same time, they realized one thing. Regarding the five-ring swordsman, this treasure and beast would probably be very serious in the future and would no longer be as indifferent as before. What was the reason for this? The reason why the Taoist true immortals were so demanding of this person was only because they subconsciously felt uneasy about the sword vein. The Buddhist true immortals couldn't forget it because they were the ones who suffered every time. For example, the Hung River Yang god this time, although strictly speaking didn't belong to the Buddhist sect, they had a very deep relationship with each other and could be used. However, they couldn't say these thoughts out loud. Under the justice of the heavenly eye, their little tricks had to have a bottom line. Otherwise, if they were exposed, they wouldn't have any problems, but it was hard to say whether they could continue to control the heavenly eye. Chapter 1663. Outside the capital realm, the three swordsmen agreed on a meeting location. Then, he entered the realm alone. Why did they have to agree to Takizawa's final request? In fact, at the last moment of Takizawa's life, Takizawa understood very clearly that none of these grand cultivators were short-sighted. They knew what was best for themselves and their sect. For Takizawa himself, there was a chance that he would reincarnate and cultivate again. This chance was much higher than normal cultivators. This was because he had once received the supreme inheritance of the star-plucking sect. Therefore, death did not completely mean the end to him. It could also be the beginning of a new chapter. Based on this philosophy, he made the best choice between the enemy who wanted to kill him and the two sects that he once belonged to. He chose to forget his hatred and serve his second sect, while also leaving the right to take revenge on his first sect. Under this arrangement, he could only choose to bury the hatchet with the murderer, including the powerful background behind the murder. This was also something he did not want to face even if he reincarnated. Should he deal with the star-plucking sect? Or the star-plucking sect and the fifth-ring sect? Any rational person would know which choice to make. This was not because Lu Xiaoyi was handsome, nor was it because he had the aura of a main character. It was because Takizawa's last and best choice. He knew many of the capital realm's true secrets, and he was even more clear about the attitude of the capital realm's higher-ups in this matter. Therefore, this visit was not as dangerous as imagined. Normal people would not have such courage, but the swordsman definitely did. He was still using the identity of Tiango, because the real Tiango had already been sent far away by the star-plucking sect. This identity was not the best choice, but it would be even more inappropriate if he changed to Lu Xiaoyi directly. With his reputation, no matter where he appeared, he would destroy the balance. Unknowingly, he had already become a role model, the type that did not play a good role. In the cultivation world, there were no absolute friends, especially between powers. A truly responsible major force or domain would make all their decisions based on their own interests and nothing else. This had nothing to do with what kind of friends the fifth ring had. There was only one reason why the star-plucking sect chose the fifth ring sect. They felt that they could obtain the greatest benefits from it. That was all. Therefore, one could not blindly rely on it. Because you don't know when and for what reason there will be some inexplicable changes in the relationship between two parties. The most important thing was to expand the contact area of the five rings. If the east didn't shine, the west would shine. I'm an outer realm cultivator, and I request an audience with you, Lord. Lu Xiaoyi was very courteous. The receptionist was even more courteous than him. These individual cultivators were a force that could not be underestimated in the void of the universe. They were the type that could not accomplish anything but were good at spoiling things. Without any special reason, even the great forces of the great domains would be courteous to such supremes. Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. I wonder if Master is here to find a friend? Or come to my Dutian Guanyo. Lu Xiaoyi didn't beat around the bush. If you want to see Senior Marshal Brother Dang Guan, you don't know anything. Please pass the message on my behalf. Unknown matter means that I have a big secret that I want to share with the people of your temple. Senior Marshal Brother Dang Guan, he himself was a primordial soul cultivator, so the senior martial brother he wanted to see could only be a yang spirit. It was just that he couldn't say it out loud. The receptionist served tea and sent out the message. This was a rather awkward moment. Most of the cultivators in the temple had gone to the void to search for fragments and opportunities. In fact, there were very few great cultivators in the sect. However, because yang spirits rarely participated in such matters, there were quite a few yang spirits left in the temple. Could it be that this wild cultivator had other intentions for choosing this time to come? In an instant, a message came back from the temple. The receptionist gestured with his hand. A few ancestors are discussing matters in the main hall. Why don't I invite Master over? Don't you want to see the yang spirit ancestors? All right, I'll take you to see them. It's just a few ancestors and a few yang spirits. Let's see if you have the guts. This was exactly what Lu Xiaoyi wanted, so he followed along, happy and content. In the main hall, there were 4 Dutian yang spirits. Why were they discussing matters? Because the most outstanding primordial spirit Jinjuan of the Dutian sect, Long Zhe, had died, without knowing why. Among them, the foolish young spirit, who was the best at divination, had divined when Lu Xiaoyi came to ask for an audience. He knew that the right and wrong of this matter was probably related to this visitor, which was why he had received him this time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for a wild cultivator's primordial spirit to bear the pomp of 4 Taoist young spirits. As soon as he entered the Dutian hall, the 4 cultivators pressed down like mountains, but they couldn't stop the wild cultivator in front of them from walking calmly. Although his face was covered by a mask, they could still feel that this person's strength was like the deep sea, without a bottom line. This was very abnormal, because the natural realm pressure of the upper level of yang spirit was not something that could be ignored just because one wanted to. It contained a very profound Tao state power, as if they were not pressuring a person, but a part of the universe. This was not something that ordinary wild cultivators could do. They were very sure. Wild cultivators generally showed their strength, but they lacked the temperament that could only be cultivated in the top forces, where they could remain calm even if the stars collapsed in front of them. Hiding one's face is not the way of cultivation. The Dutian sect has been established for tens of thousands of years, but we have never received a person like you who hides his face so openly. Do you have anything to say? Taoist Fengdu, who was the leader, was aggressive from the beginning. Lu Xiaoyi had no intention of taking off his mask. Since he came in wearing it, he would not take it off. Otherwise, he should have come in with his real face. For cultivators like them, to identify a cultivator's identity, appearance was the most important thing. Breath, divine sense, and so on were more important. It's just a fig leaf. If you wear it on your face, at least there's room to maneuver. If you really show it, it'll be inconvenient for you to talk. I'm afraid you'll be suspected of using your power to oppress others. Fengdu's eyes narrowed. Using his power to oppress others? Who could use his power to oppress his Dutian domain? Needless to say, this was another big force from outside. Which one was it? Since you don't want to show your true face, please tell us your purpose. Although we are from a small sect, we can't afford to be the arrival of an expert. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake if I speak too much. If I offend the upper realm, I'm afraid it'll be a disaster for the realm. Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly. Although there was no great danger in coming in contact with Dutian, the art of speaking was very difficult to master. If he spoke too harshly, He would appear overbearing, but if he spoke too softly, it would make people feel that he had something to ask for. I'm here to return a set of treasures to your sect. Without hesitation, he waved his hand, and 3 cauldrons and a jade floated in the air. It was the set of treasures that Takizawa had taken away. The 4 young gods were slightly moved. They were discussing Takizawa's death, and to a large extent, it was because they had lost this set of treasures. But now that it was suddenly returned, none of the 4 took it, because what they took was not the treasures, but karma. Feng pretended to be surprised. Such a treasure. Why don't you keep it for yourself? Why return it? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. It can grow wings. Why look up to a ladder? Chapter 1664. Feng stopped underestimating him and realized that the cultivator in front of him was not to be trifled with. Thus, he lowered his posture and said in an equal tone, "Since fellow Taoist has returned Du Tian's treasure, then you must be clear about the person who stole the treasure and killed him, right?" Lu Xiaoyi did not evade. "Of course I am clear about it. He killed and stole the treasure and gave it back. He is indeed the same person." The 4 young gods had already expected this. They were still surprised that this person was so frank. What was fearless? This was fearless. The way Taoists did things was to reciprocate politeness. So, even if he was a murderer, he came to your mountain gate and took the initiative to admit it. This in itself represented something. What's more, he had returned your sect's treasure. This was not a chance encounter in the void where enmity would be settled when they bumped into each other. This was a visit and an attitude. Then, as a force of a big world, they had to show their attitude. Feng said in a deep voice, "Takizawa was a pillar of Du Tian. How can fellow Taoist teach me about his death?" Lu Xiaoyi took out a jade slip. "This is Takizawa's last words. You will know after you read it." The 4 young gods scanned it with their divine senses and were shocked. The cause and effect were clear at a glance. They had heard about Takizawa's experience in the past few hundred years. It was also a very strange thing. There was a faint big force against him, but it was done in an extremely secretive manner. From all the signs, it did not seem to be against Du Tian, but more like a purely personal dispute. Now it seemed that it was actually Zhaixing. Du Tian and Zhaixing had adhered to the strategy of not interfering with each other all these years. After all, there were 2 anchor claws. It was not to the point of fighting each other to the death. It was not good for anyone. Regarding the big traitor in Zhaixing, they were all young gods and had seen a lot. Of course, they had heard of him, but they did not expect him to be transferred to Du Tian Temple. Then there was a very difficult question. Was Takizawa a Zhaixing? Or was he a Du Tian? How could they simply treat this massacre as a provocation to Du Tian? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, "There are no innocent people here. There are no victims. It was just one of the countless helplessness of the universe's cultivation world." Zhaixing did not want to fall into a passive position and did not want to have irreconcilable conflicts with Du Tian. Other than assassination, they couldn't find a better way. Du Tian is not wrong, but if everyone knows Takizawa's origin, will they still regard him as a pillar? He will not betray Du Tian. This can be seen from the fact that he entrusted me to bring back the 3 treasures before he died. However, he will definitely cause a rift between Du Tian and Zhaixing. At that time, the one who will have to pay the price will not only be Zhaixing, but also Du Tian. Takizawa didn't seem to be wrong either. He was only doing what a cultivator should do. Am I wrong? I want to obtain Zhaixing's support, but I also don't want to give up Du Tian's recognition. That's why he helped Zhaixing kill Takizawa and brought Sanbao here to beg for mercy. That's what I'm here to express. Everyone is doing what they think they should do. Fortunately, it seems that we don't have any fundamental differences in direction. Yu Ji snorted coldly. "Fellow Taoist, you are trying to confuse us." Long Zhe was a Du Tian cultivator before he reached the upper Yang spirit realm. You can't convict him of something he hasn't done. What if he can't reach the upper Yang spirit realm? Then he will be the strongest primordial spirit in Dutian and will contribute a lot to Dutian. In the end, he will lose his life just for the possibility of a future? Lu Xiaoyi didn't deny it. In fact, it was impossible for him to confuse the four yang spirits. What he really wanted to do was that in the cultivation world, there were always countless sacrifices and countless people who gave up on themselves to achieve power. When the wood had already been turned into a boat, would you choose to be carefree and take revenge? Or would you rationally choose the most beneficial result for Dutian based on reality? Senior is right. I am indeed doing this for my own purpose.
There is no doubt about that.
Therefore, I will send Sanbao back. I hope that the virtuous people of Dutian can make a rational judgment about this. He didn't quibble. His straightforwardness made the four yang spirits feel at least comfortable. What they needed to see now was, among the yang spirits in Dutian, were the rational ones the majority? Or were the unrestrained ones the majority? Even the glorious light sect's 100 years of spying could not get an accurate answer. Feng Do narrowed his eyes. Fellow Taoist, you are from the fifth ring, right? Lu Xiaoyi didn't deny it. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden from others. Because of the difference in style, there seemed to be no other family besides the fifth ring who could do such a big thing and still dare to swagger to their door. After making a mistake and doing something bad, one of the prerequisites for obtaining the forgiveness of others was to not hide it and not try to cover it up. This was the cornerstone of understanding. The fifth ring has always been at odds with the radiant world. It's impossible to reconcile. But we have nothing to do with Dutian, so from a psychological point of view, we don't want our world to get too close to the radiant world. The matter of Takizawa may become the glue between Dutian and the radiant world, but it may also provide an opportunity for Dutian and the fifth ring to understand each other. I hope it's the latter. For your world, why don't you look at the sincerity of others and compare goods? One of the yang spirits who had been silent all this time said, in fact, you can also reveal the news to us first, and then everyone can come up with a feasible method, but there's no need to be so anxious. This kind of thing, no matter who it is a kind of insult. Lu Xiaoyi disagreed. If it's really possible to do this, why didn't Jiaxing do it for hundreds of years? They had the most reason to do so. Maintaining the stability between the two largest forces in the anchor chain was far more important than a single cultivator. We can't do this, because if we really reveal it in advance, the seniors will inevitably have countless guesses. Is someone using this to sow discord, weaken, and split Dutian? The final result will be endless delay until both sides lose patience. Without Takizawa recovering his memory, I'm afraid that the tens of thousands of years of stability between your two families will be broken, and you'll go from collaborators to enemies and be hostile to each other. Therefore, it's best for an outsider like me to do it. The yang spirits were silent. This was the truth. It was difficult to do what was said, but it was easier to do it. Many things in the cultivation world were like this, and it was also the beginning of countless wrangling. They were hesitating. In fact, it wasn't that they were hesitating now, but that they had been hesitating all this time. The general trend of the universe was still very chaotic, and the future was unclear. They originally belonged to the kind of people who hoped that the anchor chain would float and sink and the radiant world would unite to form another faction. But now it seemed that the ideal was full, but the reality was very thin. Only when the major forces gathered together in the anchor chain did they feel how unreliable the so-called alliance was. There was no cohesion, no centripetal force, no core, no concept. If everyone just huddled together for warmth, what was the point of such an alliance? It could fall apart at any time. Chapter 1665. Lu Xiaoyi did not receive a definite answer. This was within his expectations. The fact that Dutian could accept the three treasures and walk out of the Dutian mountain gate unscathed meant something. He had to leave enough time for him to consider and think. He could not put down his pride now, but in the future, he could give both sides a way out through an unexpected event. Even before he left, Dutian's sun god still warned him that he would not be lenient when they met in the void in the future. This was a situation that he had to go through. One thing was true. When Takizawa's reincarnation identity was exposed, he was no longer a pure Dutian cultivator. No one could avoid this and pretend not to know the huge changes that his true awakening would bring to Dutian. Of course, you could pretend that nothing had happened when the small splinter pierced your hand, and it was indeed nothing serious. But this splinter would quietly appear in your leisure time, in silence, when you were deep in thought, and when you were not paying attention, to remind you of its existence. Lu Xiaoyi had to wait. He had to wait until Dutian was annoyed and wanted to pull out this wooden thorn. He could pass her a small knife or tweezers from the side, or help her apply ointment, blow a few breaths, and say a few heartwarming words. This was the propriety of a cultivator. This was temperament. It didn't suit his usual carefree style. Junior Marshall brother, it's best to stay on the anchor chain for a while. Zhaixing is not stable, Dutian is not stable, and Hung River is unpredictable. The key is to consolidate your foundation in the initial stage. Oh right, you gave Zhaixing away. How are you going to explain it to them? After the three of them met, Guang Yao reminded him. Lu Xiaoyi had a scoundrel face. I'll tell them the truth. I told Dutian everything, so of course I can't favor one over the other. It's the same for Zhaixing. When I go back, I'll tell them that I had no choice but to reveal my secret. I'm willing to build a bridge between them. Guang Yao was speechless. Come to think of it, telling the truth was indeed the best way. It might cause a moment of unhappiness, but in the long run, it would completely eliminate the hidden danger. This move was a bit like a scoundrel in the marketplace. Not everyone could use it, but Lu Xiaoyi could. This was the effect that could only be achieved by personal charm and strength. One of them had outstanding strength and was already heading for double digits after sun slaying. The other had a strong background and was a bit of a scoundrel in character. What else could you say other than shaking your head and complaining? Reputation and strength were also important components of a diplomatic mission. This was something that had to be acknowledged. If the crow ancestor was still here, he would just need to sit here, and everything would be fine. They would have already held a Dharma assembly to celebrate the birth of the alliance, and at the same time, they would also have to fight to be the vanguard. We'll have to stay for a while, and there are many things. Senior brother, I think that sometimes when you do things you can drag Zhou Xian along. Don't put on airs. The fifth ring and Zhou Xian are already standing in the same trench. Whether we do it or not, others will think so. Why don't we just offer? Guang Yao nodded. I've had this intention for a long time. We'll start when they come back. Zhou Xian. What's up with that female cultivator called Kawa? I heard that you and this woman have some ambiguous relationship in Zhou Xian. Are you clean? If you're really close to her, what do you need me to keep quiet about? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. There's nothing that can't be said. What do I have to hide? She's just a senior sister, and our relationship is just ordinary. At the side, Piggyback was getting impatient. I say, can't you guys talk about something more meaningful? What's there to talk about women? One is hemming and hawing, the other is trying to cover it up. Isn't it just romantic debts everywhere? What's the big deal? Lu Xiaoyi was silent. He was in trouble, and it wasn't small. It wasn't in Hung River, nor was it in star-plucking sky. It was the information obtained after killing Li Taikan. The Yang god of Hung River was also a heavenly eye. This problem was a little tricky. Even someone as careless as him knew that after he entered Heavenly Eye, he had only completed one mission, and it couldn't be considered a success. However, he had already killed 2 of his own people. Regardless of the specific reason, the fact that this was a fact would not be pleasant to hear. Therefore, he stayed here to consolidate his realm and to wait for news from Heavenly Eye. He needed to settle these troubles before he could set out with peace of mind. Time passed slowly, and the order of the anchor chain seemed to no longer be important. Now, what was more important was the fragments of the 5 ether drifting in the universe and the countless joys and sorrows it had caused. The most important of which was that someone had killed in Sky Waterfall Lake. The murderer was unknown, and no one knew who had such tyrannical means. In the star-plucking domain, Lu Xiaoyi was living leisurely, His days were leisurely, especially when he had a beautiful senior sister by his side. Kawa's main target was the star-plucking domain, so it was very normal for them to meet here. She wasn't the kind of person who liked to look for so-called opportunities outside. Little E, tell me the truth. Have you already taken down the star-plucking domain? Kawa glared at him, because even someone as meticulous as her could feel that the star-plucking domain had been a little different recently. When she thought about how this person had fought for the star-plucking domain, everything made sense. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. It's not me, it's us. Kawa snorted. You want to tie Zhou Xian to the Fifth Ring's war chariot? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior sister, I'm not tying everyone to the Fifth Ring's war chariot. I'm tying everyone together to form a new war chariot. There are many parts in a war chariot, and the Fifth Ring is only one of the more combative parts. The essence of war is to rope in the majority and kill the minority. If you insist on being aloof, you'll put your fate in the hands of others. Bind. As long as our group is big enough, we'll be able to attract more and more forces to join us. It'll be very difficult at first, but when the snowball reaches a certain size, it'll form a brilliant momentum. Don't fuss over every little thing. Does everyone have to be like-minded? How can there be so many like-minded people? We just need to make sure that before the era changes, our interests are the same, and that's enough. Kawa felt a little helpless. In reality, among the many external forces in the anchor chain, in terms of size, Zhou Xian was second only to Heaven's Choice. But in terms of roots, it was a powerful world in the origin world. Logically speaking, it should be the most respected and naturally formed the core of the origin world. However, after coming to the anchor chain, she realized how naive her thinking was. Zhou Xian was the most despised of all the external forces here. This had nothing to do with size. The same situation was reflected in their attitude towards Heaven's Choice. Wanting to have Zhou Xian as the core was just a dream. Actually, she had a premonition before coming here. Bai Mei and the others also had the same premonition. The origin world was too big, so it was difficult to have a true core. If there had to be one, in this kind of chaotic world, it would have to be the most aggressive. Zhou Xian did not have this kind of temperament. Chapter 1666. Lu Xiaoyi found a place to hide in the star-seizing realm. It was also to summarize and reflect on what he had gained in the past few hundred years. This was something he had always insisted on ever since he started cultivating. The direction of his cultivation method could be further expanded instead of being stuck to the Big Dipper scripture. In the primordial spirit realm, the means of his opponents had reached a new height. In the future, he would face challenges from the young gods of various orthodoxies. There were all kinds of secret skills that covered everything. This required him to come into contact with more on the path of cultivation, broaden his horizons, and enrich his foundation. Only then could he respond to different changes at any time. He was lucky to have gathered the 5 grands as well as Hundun. How to make full use of this and manifest this set of Tao state power in swordsmanship was the most important thing for him at this stage. In the cultivation world, very few people used the Tao realm power of the 5 grand essences in battle. This was because it was not sharp enough, and it was easy to learn but hard to master. This was because only when the 5 eccentrics were gathered could the power of the entire basic power be unleashed. He was very lucky, as he had mastered the 5 ties and chaos. Of course, he had to unleash his unique advantage, because the formation of the universe originated from the 5 ties, and from there, the other innate Taos were born. In other words, when he could master the power of the 5 ties, theoretically, he could decipher any innate Taos. Because the foundation was with him, there was no ready-made swordsmanship to learn, not even Xuanyu and Scabbard. Now that his cultivation had reached the immortal divinity stage, the most substantial thing that could increase his strength was the formation of his own vital qi. No matter how the world of cultivation defined this thing, his first task was to convert all of his refined mana into vital qi. Only then could he have a higher efficiency and sharper flying sword. Primordial Qi was compatible and could do anything that magic power could do. If he had primordial Qi when he was fighting Lydican, the battle would have been much easier. The path of Hengdi region was different from the mainstream of cultivation in the universe. It was weirder and easier to see results. But because of this, Hengdi region did not have a defensive weapon that orthodox Taoist cultivators had when they reached the level of Yang spirit, the auspicious cloud. This was his good fortune, but also his misfortune. Auspicious clouds, 5-colored clouds, auspicious Qi, like smoke but not smoke, like clouds but not clouds, melancholy and bleak, also known as Jingyun, Qingyun. The sun hung leisurely in the vast sky. The 6 mountains were motionless and condensed into flying smoke. Flying geese swam out from below. Auspicious clouds and clear scenery swirled around. It was not something that should be present in the Yang spirit realm, but a vision that only appeared when immortals appeared. It was something that carried the 3 flowers and 5 Qi. It was the recognition of a cultivator who had reached a certain high level in his understanding of Taoist magic. It was a combination of a great cultivator's own Taoist magic, fate, and Taoist magic. Not only did it require extremely high conditions in all aspects, but it also required a very long time to condense. This time could easily start from 1,000 years. Therefore, ordinary Yang Spirit Supremes simply did not have the time to condense such a troublesome thing, even if it did have a miraculous effect and could restrict the opponent's attack and invasion on the level of the Dharma. The condensation of the Yang Spirit was too far-fetched. His cognition in all aspects had not yet been baptized by the declined state. He lacked precipitation and had flaws. It was laborious and unrewarding. However, these were problems more than 10,000 years ago. With the development of the cultivation world in the universe, all kinds of divine skills and secret skills had the tendency to spread downward, especially after the collapse of the Great Way and the chaos of the rules. The gap opened by the heavenly way was not only in the difficulty of the upper realm, but also in other aspects. No one with true power would be greedy and make a bunch of strange defensive methods. They all knew the importance of profoundness, so they often dug out the most effective defense in the aspects they were best at. For example, Qingyun. It turned out that this thing was something that only half immortals were qualified to dabble in the normal cultivation order. They could create half of a Qingyun to completely solve their own defense system and free up their hands to do other things. Only when they entered the immortal record could they truly condense a complete Qingyun. However, the heavenly way was now chaotic. Although only immortals could condense a true Qingyun according to the rules, the threshold of half a Qingyun had been opened from half immortals to the top experts of the Yang spirit, especially those with extraordinary backgrounds. Whether or not they could condense half a Qingyun was an important factor in determining the foundation of a Yang spirit. Until now, Liu Xiaoyi had not encountered a Taoist Yang spirit with half a Qingyun. Previously, it was an ordinary Yang spirit. After that, it was Heng He who did not walk the Qingyun path but the divine path, so he had missed it perfectly. However, in the future, it was inevitable that he would encounter such a Yang spirit, so he had to make arrangements in advance and prepare for a rainy day. It was not that he wanted to condense a Qingyun, but when he mastered the 5 empresses of the innate Great Way, it was equivalent to solving the foundation of condensing a Qingyun. If he did not know how to use such innate conditions, wouldn't he be stupid? Among the innate Great Ways, it was not surprising to master a single one. The most important thing was to form a system. For example, the 5 empresses plus the chaos system was the basic system. The most direct appearance was the direct help to the condensation of Qingyun. The 5 virtue system could bring out the faith of all living beings to the extreme. As long as humans were not extinct, it would be inexhaustible. The 5 luck system could see through 10,000 years and solve all mysteries. The space-time system formed by time and space, the reincarnation system formed by karma, and so on. Mastering a system would have great power. However, in the previous collapse of the Great Way, there was no collapse of a system. Instead, there was a collapse of a system. The 5 empresses were the first to form a system. They could collapse in a system, but it was impossible for cultivators to learn in a system. This was the difference. Therefore, his current level of mastery of the Tao realm provided a solid foundation for condensing Qingyun, or through the process of condensing Qingyun, to deduce a certain offensive skill. In this sense, the primordial spirit realm was of great help to him. It was so great that if he completed his plan, he could even fight against the Taoyang spirit without dodging. In a swordsman's battle, it would never be able to achieve a balance of offense and defense. Without such a philosophy and ability, the swordsman would always be in an awkward position when it came to defense. Swordsmen would always attack and use offense to replace defense. This was a philosophy, but it could not be applied everywhere. There would always be situations that you would not expect, especially when the opponent knew that you were a swordsman, but was still willing to fight with you in an open space. There must be a way, there must be a way. The swordsman's sword always made people feel helpless, but why were others always helpless? If Lu Xiaoyi was a Dharma cultivator, he would think of 1,000 ways to restrict the swordsman's escape. No one was a fool. When a swordsman went up against a Yuanying or a Jinjuan, it could be clearly seen in many cases of death. They were greatly restricted in the battle environment, just like in the battle between Lu Xiaoyi and Hengyang's spirit. He was actually pulled into a situation where he could not escape. This was the meaning of Qingyun. Chapter 1667. Lu Xiaoyi focused on his own cultivation. With his status, it was not suitable for him to go out and build relationships, so it was better to leave it to the 7 messengers of the 5th ring. This was a long process. He liked to cut the Gordian knot and do what he liked. Even if he had nothing to do and slept, it was better than thinking about this and that all day long. Kawa did not come often. She was busy communicating with the other cultivators of Zhou Xian, including the people of the 5th ring. The premise of establishing an alliance was to understand each other's character, habits, style of doing things, and demands. In the end, it was difficult for them to make a final decision. They still needed the approval of the higher-ups of both sides. The alliance of domains was related to the future of thousands of cultivators. It was not something that could be decided on a whim. From this point of view, he had already regarded himself as a superior, although he did not feel it. Xiaoyi, what are you practicing? The top of your head is covered in dust and fog, and there is a strange smell. Are you practicing to urge the rain? Or did you eat too much and fart? Kawa found it strange when she saw it by chance. Only she could see it. If others came to visit, Lu Xiaoyi would not show it to others. Almost everyone who stayed with Lu Xiaoyi for a long time would more or less be influenced by his way of speaking. It was as if they would feel uncomfortable if they did not say a few words to disgust him. Lu Xiaoyi was proud. This is the auspicious cloud. Isn't it amazing? Kawa was shocked. How could she not know about the auspicious cloud? It was a rare thing that only the Taoyang spirit could cultivate. It was said that once it was cultivated, it would be invulnerable to water and fire, and could form an effective defense against any kind of attack. It was the culmination of high-end cultivators' defense. There was only one cloud, and there was no need for other defensive methods. In Zhou Xian, in the carefree travel, she had only seen senior brother Bai Mei cultivate such a cloud. According to him, it was far from half a cloud. This guy was only a primordial spirit cultivator, and a new one at that. How could he cultivate such a thing? Out of curiosity, she waved her hand lightly, bringing up a gust of wind. She really did not use any strength. It was just 10% of a normal spell. The wind blew past, and the thin cloud was like cotton, and in an instant, it was blown away without a trace. Lu Xiaoyi could not stop it in time. He watched his auspicious cloud disappear with the wind and could not help but complain. It was supposed to be an auspicious day, but in the end, it became a fleeting cloud. Senior sister is really unromantic, too much. Kawa covered her mouth and laughed. Xiaoyi, this is an auspicious cloud? I'm afraid it is not even a rain cloud. Don't use it in a real battle. If others see it, you'll be a joke. Although she said that, She was also surprised in her heart, because her wind was not an ordinary breeze, but a Taoist wind. No matter how powerful or weak it was, once it was used, it was impossible for it to disappear on its own. If it was a real rain cloud, this gust of wind would have blown thousands of miles away after dispersing the rain cloud. However, after blowing away Lu Xiaoyi's so-called auspicious cloud, her wind also disappeared completely. Even she, a caster, could not feel how it disappeared. Xiaoyi, I heard that there are many kinds of auspicious clouds. There are visionary auspicious clouds, harmonious auspicious clouds, ambitious auspicious clouds, 5-color auspicious clouds, 3-flower auspicious clouds, and so on. Senior brother Bai Mei cultivates the 3-flower auspicious cloud. What kind of auspicious cloud is yours? Lu Xiaoyi said discouragingly, this is not an auspicious cloud, it's a haze. Actually, the so-called auspicious cloud had a lot to do with the Tao realm that the cultivator had grasped. For example, the visionary auspicious cloud was an auspicious cloud that only the heavens did not speak. It was an auspicious cloud that showed people an image. Taoist things were shrouded in clouds and mist. He was too lazy to care about what kind of auspicious cloud he would create. After all, it was based on the 5 ties. He had not thought about what to merge into it in the end. Grasping too many Tao realms was also troublesome. It was not easy to choose. He did not want to give up on any of them, but he also knew that this was not appropriate. He could not put all the Tao realms together and have a universe stew. The condensation of auspicious clouds could not be done overnight. Even if he had a deep foundation of the 5 ties and could feel the auspicious clouds faster than others, if he wanted to reach a level that could help him in battle, it would still take a long time. He was afraid that it would not be able to help him in a short period of time. Every time he ascended to the next level, it was the beginning of a new journey. Cultivation was so addictive. You would never lose your pursuit of your goal because when you climbed to a peak, there would definitely be another peak waving at you. Senior sister, have you heard of the yin-yang auspicious cloud? Kawa thought for a moment. It's the first time I've heard of it. Can every innate great Tao form an independent auspicious cloud? However, I heard that only golden immortals who are compatible with the innate great Tao are qualified to form an innate great Tao auspicious cloud. What's the origin of your yin-yang auspicious cloud? Lu Xiaoyi said with a naughty smile. Yin and yang, clouds give birth to dense mist. One is active and one is still, the Tao is natural. If senior sister wants to learn, I can teach you. Kawa finally understood. This was dual cultivation. This could also produce auspicious clouds? She would not try it. It was obviously a trap. This thing's mind was all messy things all day long. She swept away and said, go back and find your senior sister in the dome. Yanmeng? Yandai? Is there a chimney? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head inwardly. That bastard Guang Yao had really exposed him completely. In the star-picking mountain sect, Broken Silkworm was sitting alone in a quiet room. He had been in seclusion for a period of time and had handed over the matters of the sect to the other young gods. The star-picking mountain was not only his, and he had never monopolized it. A junior martial brother transmitted with his divine sense, senior martial brother. That little guy exposed all of our secrets in Dutian. He's really despicable. How are we going to get along with Dutian in the future? Broken Silkworm was indifferent. Did Dutian find trouble with us?
No.
Then what are you worried about? After removing a piece of your heart, you can face Dutian openly. Other than losing some face, what you've obtained is a stable future. What else are you dissatisfied with? He should have told us in advance. Get used to it. Swordsmen are used to doing things first. This is a bad habit passed down from their ancestors. But if you think about it carefully, you'll be able to see the deeper meaning behind it. In the future, if everyone is really tied together, it's better to be honest about such dirty things as early as possible. Is it comfortable to wait until after the alliance is formed and then be exposed by someone with ulterior motives? The junior martial brother retreated. Broken Silkworm smiled bitterly. This little guy was really watertight when doing things. Sly and cunning. But this kind of character was not annoying, because joining forces with such a person meant that they would not suffer too much. Thinking back, that earth-shattering figure was also like this. How is there a trace of righteousness?
But he was trustworthy.
He was worth following. That was the most important thing. The universe was changing. The strong would rise, and the weak would fall. What was needed was ambitious and ruthless, not tragic heroes. He was very clear about this. Chapter 1668. In an ordinary waterside pavilion, several benevolent sailing young gods faced each other in silence. This was a late discussion. Because they were looking for fragments, it took several years for the great cultivators to gradually return. After tens of thousands of years, benevolent sailing had moved from the tail of the anchor to the claw position. This was a great thing, but there was no joy in the eyes of the benevolent sailing young gods, as if it was an ordinary change. It was not that benevolent sailing young gods could keep their composure, but in the cultivation world, more than 300 years was far from enough. In the mortal world, there was a saying that it took 10 years for a tree to grow and 100 years for a person to grow. But in the cultivation world, this age had to be increased to at least 1,000 years. Only by not falling out of the anchor claw or arm for 1,000 years could the reserve of benevolent sailing young gods show a phenomenon of a blowout. This was an accident. The next time they returned to the right track, it would probably be the day they returned to the tail of the anchor. More than 300 years, they could barely cultivate some Jin Dan. Even Yuanying felt that it was not enough time, let alone Jinjuan. 90% of the Jinjuan who went up in the anchor chain sequencing this time would still be them in the next sequencing. At that time, without the collective collapse of the great Tao fragments, what could they use to create an accident? Of course, they would return to where they came from. There was no need to think too much about it. It was inevitable. Therefore, they actually had nothing to be happy about. This was not the true strength of benevolent sailing young gods. It was just a flash in the pan. One of the young gods blamed himself and said, "I was the one who introduced the Hengi boundary to everyone. During this period, I have been communicating with them, so I can't blame myself for everything that happened." In one battle, most of them were destroyed, and they became the joke of the anchor chain. A young god's senior brother comforted him. "Junior brother, why do you blame yourself? It was just an accident. Moreover, we have also been in contact with the Hengi boundary. This is a joint decision of everyone. You don't have to bear it yourself. This is not something that one person can bear. When the Hengi boundary is defeated, we immediately abandon our friends. Won't this attract the attention of the forces of other realms? Do you think that Ci Hang is a short-sighted force that only looks at immediate benefits?" Everyone agreed. This was also a common understanding in the cultivation world. Although they still had to choose a more powerful force to ally with in the end, this was a test of their skills. They needed to maintain their reputation. If they did it too hastily, it would be easy to be slandered by others. They would be seen as unreliable and passive. Therefore, under normal circumstances, even if they felt remorseful, they would still persevere for a period of time and then find another reason to avoid the limelight this time. This was the safest way for a cultivation force. The self-blaming young spirit sighed and said, "I've always been close to Senior Marshal Brotherly of Hung River, so I've always kept his purpose of coming to the anchor chain a secret. But now that everything has changed, I can't say anything. I hope all of you are mentally prepared." The young spirits of Ci Hang began to take it seriously. Everyone had their own circle and their own secrets, especially young spirits like them. Of course, they were qualified to have their own secrets and did not need to report everything to the sect. However, if a young spirit took the initiative to say it, it must be because he thought that it was likely to affect the sect, so it was not a trivial matter. The young spirit sighed and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Li didn't come to the anchor chain just because he happened to pass by here. He also wanted to see the situation of the anchor chain. He actually came to the anchor chain for a purpose. The purpose was that a 5-ring Xianyuan swordsman with the Ean's spirit cultivation base had some conflicts with the cultivators of Hung River when he passed by. He killed 7 or 8 Jinjuan of Hung River, including a Yang spirit. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Only a swordsman could do such a thing. A Yin spirit killing a Yang spirit. This was going against the heavens. Senior Marshal Brotherly judged that the swordsman would pass by the anchor chain. Because he couldn't find him in the void, he came to the anchor chain early to wait for him. He waited for nearly 100 years. He finally found his trace on the miniature star map sequencing. A Yang spirit of CI Hang reacted and said, "Do you mean that he was hiding in the sequencing team of Zhaixing? And the swordsman was the one who destroyed the team?" That's right. Senior Marshal Brotherly's judgment can't be wrong. After the sequencing was over, he chased after him. I didn't want to cause trouble for the sect, so I took the initiative to avoid him and went far away to try my luck with the fragments. The leading Yang spirit gasped. "Shitty, have you ever asked about the background of the Xianyuan swordsman?" The Yang spirit shook his head and said, "I'm not stupid.
Why would I ask about that?
There's no reason to get into trouble again. But even if I didn't ask, I know who he is. He came from the direction of Zhou Xian, a Yin spirit, and was able to kill the Yang spirit of Hung He." Senior Marshal Brothers, after hearing what I said, you can probably guess most of it. The leading Senior Marshal Brothers' expression changed, and he said, "You mean that Senior Marshal Brotherly of Hung, he killed the Xianyuan swordsman." So in order to prevent Xianyuan from coming to take revenge, he has to draw a clear line with Hung, He, and get rid of the implication? This is really... If you say so, I think we have to settle things with the people of Hung, He as soon as possible. Those swordsmen are unreasonable. Who knows what methods they will use to take revenge? The Yang spirit was very confused. "Senior Marshal Brother, I didn't say that Senior Marshal Brother Li killed the Xianyuan swordsman." The leading Senior Marshal Brother let out a long breath and said impatiently, "You're hemming and hawing when you say something. You can't even explain it clearly after a long time. What exactly happened that made you make such a fuss?" This time, the Yang spirit finally finished his words. "I didn't see it with my own eyes, but because I was familiar with Senior Marshal Brotherly and for his safety on the anchor chain, I told him that I left a signal source in his body. The main reason was that I was afraid that if he did something, CI Hang would be the first to react. But when I was looking for fragments in the void, I suddenly found that the signal source had disappeared and it had lost its response. I was also afraid that he would run away after doing something big and leave CI Hang here as a scapegoat, so I rushed to the place where the signal source disappeared. When I arrived at the scene of the incident, I carefully examined it. In the end, it turned out that Senior Marshal Brotherly was killed by someone. That's why I immediately rushed back. Today, I invited all Senior Marshal Brothers to gather here and see what kind of rules we can come up with. Another Yang spirit was killed. The people of CI Hang were a little confused. Combined with this person's previous legendary achievements, it seemed that this person's killing of the Yang spirit was no longer a matter of luck, nor was it a matter of taking advantage of the situation. It was because he had such an ability. The problem seemed to be complicated. So, was he still connected to the Hengi sector?
Or was he drawing a line?
Or was he pretending not to know and playing dumb? This was a test of the collective wisdom of a force. They were still connected. This 5-ring Xianyuan swordsman was really a little scary. The key was that he was obviously still connected to the most powerful Zhaixing of the anchor chain. This seemed to set the tone for the overall direction of the anchor chain in the future. If they still clung to the Hengi sector and refused to let go, their future would not be easy. Leave the Hengi sector aside? Wouldn't the people of the Hengi sector come for revenge? They were really in a dilemma. Chapter 1669. Lu Xiaoyi's time of happiness didn't last for long. There was a mission from the Heaven Eyes. It was simple and clear. Jinxiu Heaven and Earth, eliminate evil and defend the Tao. There were other specific arrangements, so there was no need to go into detail. His boots finally landed on the ground, but Lu Xiaoyi's mood was not calm. After more than 1,000 years of cultivation, he had a deep understanding of this world of cultivation. He was very clear about the way to survive in the world of cultivation. Moreover, he was very understanding of human relationships and knew the details. He could also learn something from this task. He was no longer a greenhorn who didn't know anything. He wouldn't think that everything was fine just because he didn't do anything wrong. Doing things his own way was a sign of immaturity. How could he stay out of this chaotic situation? No matter what he did wrong, he had killed 2 of his colleagues since joining the Heaven Eyes. If he was in charge of the Heaven Eyes, he would definitely teach such a naughty person a lesson. This had nothing to do with whether you did something wrong or not, because if the matter wasn't dealt with, it would have an impact on the system. When it came to the normal operation of the system and personal gains and losses, the higher-ups had to prioritize the former. That was why the appearance of this mission was strange. It didn't express the dissatisfaction of the higher-ups of the Heaven Eyes toward him at all, as if it was just an ordinary mission. The more it was like this, the more cautious he had to be. He had to be on guard against any traps. This was a problem that could only be solved by him alone. His background couldn't help him, and he couldn't drag his friends down with him. The Jinshio Heaven and Earth was 30 years away from the anchor chain, which was where the Beiyu came from. This was another reason for his suspicions. He wanted to go there to see the mysterious sword vein behind the Beiyu, but he didn't put it on the itinerary. Now that he had fallen asleep, someone handed him a pillow. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? He quietly left the realm and didn't say anything to anyone. This was the benefit of not joining the mission. He was free to come and go. He followed the star map and set a direction before turning into a ray of light. At the same time, news came from the inner realm to a meteor outside. There were dozens of cultivators gathered here. They were all at the perfected lord level, and none of them were weak. When Dasami received the message, his expression was solemn as he mobilized. Everyone. This person has already left the domain, and his direction has been set. It's time for us to settle our grudges. I'll say it again. This person is extremely strong and cannot be defeated alone. We need a 3-man team to intercept him and maintain contact with each other so that we can provide support at any time. Some cultivators were somewhat worried. Will the anchor chain cultivator intervene? After all, doing so may affect the order of the various diplomatic missions. Dasami snorted coldly. He's not a member of the envoy group. He came with his face covered. Do we need to treat him like an envoy? The cultivators here basically came from 2 sides. One was the people of Hengi River, and the other was the loose cultivators that the Buddhist sects of the main world had found to support the 3 caves. They were all forces that had suffered a great loss in the miniature scene. They had gathered here for a long time, waiting for the opportunity to walk out of the Qi lair. Swordsman was not the only person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. The people of Hengi River were also like this. Those loose cultivators were not people who could endure suffering losses. Roaming the void of the universe had created their wild temperament. Their characteristic was that they would seek revenge for any grievances. They would not care who the other party was or what kind of extraordinary background they had. Dozens of people divided into dozens of small teams and formed a huge net, encircling the person in the direction he was heading. The void hunt had officially begun. In the outer regions of the star-plucking domain, such a commotion could not be hidden from the host. Star-plucking cultivators had already sent word of the abnormality in the outer space back to the sect. When Heqian was on duty, he hastily rushed into Senior Brother Broken Silkworm's quiet room. Outside the room, he kowtowed and asked, "Demons and monsters, ghosts and monsters in the outer space. If one is not surprised, they will be defeated. Heqian, what do you think of this?" Broken Silkworm remained calm and collected. Heqian carefully said, "It's very clear that these ghosts and monsters are targeting Senior Brother Lu. They want to encircle and hunt him. Senior Brother Lu's strength is exceptional. If there were only a few people, there would be nothing to worry about. However, with dozens of cultivators coming in a group, since this is our anchor chain domain, is this kind of behavior allowed? Wouldn't that set a bad precedent? The relationship between our star-plucking domain and the 5th ring domain has just been established. At this critical moment, It's not good for us to feign ignorance and watch helplessly, right? Broken Silkworm asked, What do you think we should do? Hachien gritted his teeth. Activate the power of the star-plucking domain and sweep them away. That way, some people will know their place. The anchor chain domain has been too lenient on them in recent years. Some of these people from outside the domain are a bit ungrateful. Broken Silkworm shook his head. Too careless. Moreover, what makes you think that fellow Taoist Lu can't deal with these ghosts and monsters by himself? Seeing that Hachien still did not understand, he might as well explain it more thoroughly. The existence of these people has long been under fellow Taoist Lu's attention. However, due to the fact that they are too close to the star-plucking domain and they have not expressed their true intentions, it's hard for them to make a move. Just like this time when he goes out into the universe, he can bring these people out. The universe is vast and boundless. Playing hide-and-seek with a powerful swordsman in the void, I'm afraid that even if they have the guts to go, they won't be able to return alive. Hachien laughed dryly. Senior brother is quite confident in him. Broken Silkworm was afraid that he would act on his own, so he no longer hid it from him. You know that a young god came to Hung He and hid in Ci Hang. After the sequencing ended, this young god of Hung, he wanted to take advantage of the chaos to make a move, but in the end, he got himself involved. Why bother? With such ability and advancing to the Essence Soul stage, why are you worried about him? What you're worried about now is us old young gods. Maybe we'll go against him in that matter, and our lives will be in danger. Hachien did not know about this, and was a little stunned when he heard this. Broken Silkworm instructed, You have a good personal relationship with this person. The sect is very willing for you to make such capable friends, so I don't blame you for being worried. However, if you want to go out and help, your current strength can only be a burden. Hachien, you should put more effort into your own cultivation. Friends are friends, but if you can't keep up with others' footsteps, the gap will only widen. I don't know what others think, but don't you feel ashamed and uncomfortable? Hachien left, and the quiet room returned to peace. However, Broken Silkworm's heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. He had communicated with Lu Xiaoyi about how to deal with the group of people in outer space, but this was not the plan. He should have left them alone for a while to see how many people would join in. However, Lu Xiaoyi's departure this time came without any warning. It was very sudden. He did not even say goodbye or anything. This made Broken Silkworm a little dissatisfied. Young people were like this. Just because they had some achievements, they did not take their seniors seriously. They always thought that they could solve everything with what they had learned. Swordsmen were all like this. Pride was their biggest weakness. Looking at a certain direction in the sky, he was also very curious. Where did he go to cause trouble? Chapter 1670. Splendid heaven and earth, splendid heaven and earth. This was a world of mortals, a true world of mortals. The incomparably huge world of mortals, although not as big as the Heaven's Choice continent in terms of size, was far above the 5 rings. The so-called true world of mortals referred to the fact that this was not a place where cultivators could cultivate in the ancient and primordial times. It was not like many other worlds, which were just products of cultivation planets that gradually fell behind. From the very beginning, there was no possibility of spiritual opportunity being produced here. There was none in the past, none in the present, and none in the future. Therefore, everything in the mortal world was the same here. The people had no concept of cultivation from the root of their minds, and there were even scholars who condemned the existence of gods and monsters. This was destined to be a cultivation desert. It was still splendid because the Creator did not abandon the living beings here. Without the cultivation world, without the cultivators, this was a world ruled by mortals. The changes in history were much more colorful than the world with the influence of cultivators. There were countless countries here, and the culture became even more resplendent after the cultivators were gone. Because the most outstanding talents in the cultivation world had all rushed to cultivate, but here, there were countless talents in all walks of life. As time flowed, magnificent historical scrolls were written. Here there were still Buddhist temples and Taoist temples, but different from the cultivation world. This was the kind of place where mortals believed in sects and religions. They also raised a group of ordinary, so-called monks and cultivators who were just waiting to die. Other than being incompetent and having no skills, they were actually just a group of mortals. Among the countless large and small countries, there was the Yanzhou country, which had a long history and a legacy of more than 1,000 years. This was nothing in the cultivation world, but to the mortal world without extraordinary power, it was a miracle that the imperial power could not decline for dozens of generations or even 1,000 years. The Yanzhou country was not weak and was considered a first-rate country in the splendid world. There was no worship of Buddha or Taoism in the country, but they believed in the Confucian school's theory that the heavens were healthy and the gentleman should be strong. In the country, there were very few Buddhist temples and Taoist temples. There was one, but it was also in tatters, barely holding on. For existences like them, if they did not have the support of faith, the foundation of the masses, and the support of the imperial power, it would be a problem for them to survive, not to mention other things. In the north of the Yanzhou country, there was a vast grassland called the Great Wind Plains. Since ancient times, it had been a place of exile for Yan and Zhao. After a long time, it had become a free zone that no one cared about. Because it was bordered by neighboring countries, there were constant foreign invasions. Because of the lack of control of the government, there were bandits wreaking havoc. The local tyrants built their own strongholds to protect themselves, and they fought fiercely. To survive here, it was not something that ordinary people could endure. Almost every herdsman who lived here was an agile horseman and swordsman. Every village and tribe had their own armed forces. This situation was not like this in the early days of the Yanzhou country. The Yanzhou cavalry swept through many countries, causing people to tremble in fear. However, 2,000 years after the Yanzhou country was founded, it was no longer as glorious and had fallen to its current state. No one cared about them. The big shots were busy scheming against each other, and the foreign powers were eyeing them covetously. Some wanted to change the dynasty, some wanted to bite off a piece of fat meat from Yanzhou, and some wanted to establish themselves as kings. Who would pay attention to this place that was not peaceful, where the various powers were tangled and the people were fierce, but there was not much to gain from it. In the mortal world, at the end of every dynasty, there would be similar situations. From stability to chaos, when the chaos reached the extreme, everything would be broken, and everything would be restarted. It was an endless cycle. If you were lucky, you would live in a stable period. If you were unlucky, you could only rely on yourself to struggle. You could not blame anyone. Shaoguan village was one of the countless small tribes living in the Gale Plain. They were hundreds of people. For generations, they had grazed within a radius of 100 miles. They could make do with small groups of horse gangs and bandits. If it was a large group of horse gangs and bandits that came from a neighboring country, what awaited them was only disaster. Just like now, when the sheep were fat in autumn, a few large horse gangs joined forces to wipe out the small tribes in the grassland nearby. They were preparing for the harsh winter of the grassland and accumulating supplies. The horse gangs also needed to find targets in the autumn hunt. They would not stick to a few fixed targets. After robbing once, they would let these places rest for a few years or more and then come back again. Shaoguan village and a few small tribes around it were not very lucky. This time, they were targeted. After being robbed 9 years ago, disaster struck again. Of course, they were not fools. They would not wait foolishly after being robbed. Over the years, they had come up with a lot of countermeasures. For example, several villages would work together to protect them. For example, they could attach themselves to the nearest horse gang and ask for a certain amount of protection by paying tributes every year. But the weather was unpredictable, and people were unpredictable. The head of the Jingang stockade, which they were attached to, had suffered a great loss in the battle with another local tyrant. Their strength had been greatly reduced, and they were like clay bodhisattvas crossing a river. In the end, When a large number of horse bandits were formed for the safety of their stockade, they had become cowards. They did not even dare to provide shelter for a few small tribes, fearing that they would be besieged by the horse bandits. After all, to the horse bandits, if they could break through a stockade, it would be much better than sweeping up a few small tribes. The Jingang village's decision was very wise. The horse gangs did not use their full strength when they raided the small tribes. Their purpose was to attract the Jingang village's people to show up and give the small tribes the illusion that the horse gangs could still fight back. The result was that the resistance was in vain. After causing a certain amount of casualties, the horse gangs who did not show up began to take revenge. This was the beginning of their tragedy. The horse gangs were cruel and ruthless. However, no matter how ruthless they were, they knew that it was impossible to kill all the indigenous people. If they killed all of them, it would become a no-man's land. Who would take care of the horses and sheep for them? Therefore, they usually set a few examples and killed them as long as they did not resist too fiercely. However, the big plan this time was foiled because of the Jingang village's cowardice. They were very unhappy. In addition, a few small tribes did not see the situation clearly and resisted tenaciously. The loss of manpower was far beyond their expectations. Therefore, they decided to slaughter a village here and set a rule just to deter the small tribes who dared to resist. Xiaoguan village was set as an example because their shepherds were the bravest and resisted fiercely. The key point was that they killed the son of a horse gang leader. Even if this son was the most useless of the horse gang leader's sons, it was still a reason to be slaughtered. For the horse gangs, they must maintain a high-pressure and terrifying attitude towards these ordinary shepherds. They must let them know the consequences of daring to resist and the price they would pay for killing a horse gang member. This was the establishment of power. Otherwise, with the vastness of the Gale Plain, if every robbery was so time-consuming and laborious, sooner or later the large horse gangs could only be reduced to a small group of horse gangs. In the end, they would be devoured by others in the cruel competition on the Gale Plain. Chapter 1671. There were hundreds of people in Xiaoguan village. The elderly, children, women, and men all knew how to ride a horse and fight. Of course, the ones who truly had the ability to fight were the men, who were less than 200 years old. Now, more than half of them were dead. The remaining villagers were running away. They had lost their homes, pastures, and cattle. They did not know what awaited them in the future. Most importantly, the horse bandits did not intend to let them go. A group of 500 horse bandits was hot on their heels. Shi Bao urged his horse to gallop. He tried his best to protect the two women behind him. One was his sister, Wu Ya, and the other was his crush, Yuan Hua. They were both famous beauties in the grassland. One could imagine what would happen to them if they were caught by the horse bandits. He was 18 years old this year. In Gale Plain, he was already a competent warrior at such a young age. He was the pillar of the family, and that was exactly what he did. His parents had died in battle long ago. He was the only pillar of the family. Situations like his were not rare in Xiaoguan village. Every disaster was an elimination. The old, the weak, and the disabled were eliminated, leaving behind the most elite forces. In the Gale Plain, there was no such thing as elite youths dying in battle for the elderly. They would do it, but they would limit it to a certain extent. Otherwise, according to the prevailing etiquette of the continent, it would be impossible for any tribe to survive on the prairie. The survival of the fittest was especially cruel here. There was no warmth to speak of, because warmth would bring disaster to the tribe. In the gallop, more than 10 old men slowly reined in their horses. The horse bandits were too close. They needed to stop them. Such a task could only be undertaken by the elders. They placed their hopes on the younger ones. It was through this method that they managed to hold on for several days under the pursuit of the horse bandits, until the tribesmen who stayed behind to stop the horse bandits became younger and younger. When the 60-year-old tribesman died, the 50-year-old tribesman took over, followed by the 40-year-old strong men, and so on. Bao felt as if his heart was being pierced by a knife as he watched the dozen or so elders from his clan charge towards him. These were all his relatives, uncles that he had followed since he was a child. But now, he could only watch as they walked towards their deaths. He could not turn back. This was the strict order of the tribe. This was something that had been followed for hundreds and thousands of years. It was precisely because of this cruelty that they had survived the countless turmoil in Gale Plain. This was the principle of survival. Then, he felt that there was a new change in the direction of the tribe's escape. From heading north, they were now heading towards the northwest. This was something that could only be decided by the leader of the tribe. If they continued north for another 100 miles, they would reach Stone City, a small border town in the Yanzhou Kingdom. There was a chance that they would be able to hide in there, but it depended on the mood of the general guarding the town. Under normal circumstances, these so-called barbaric outsiders were not allowed to enter the pass easily. However, there were horse bandits behind them, and if they offered up some valuables, there was still a chance. But to run northwest, where was he going? Furthermore, there was a mountain blocking their way, so how could they display their riding abilities? He quickly urged his horse forward and caught up with the two women in front of him. He shouted, "Clan leader, where are you taking everyone? There's a mountain range several dozen miles ahead of us. Are you out of your mind? Do you want to farm on Miaofeng Peak?" Yuan Hua's clear voice rang out. "Yes, we're going up Miaofeng Peak. The chieftain said that we can't go to Stone City anymore. We've lost most of our belongings, and the horse gang is chasing us too closely. Those useless soldiers in Stone City won't dare to open the door and let us go easily." Bao was very puzzled. Even if they didn't go to Stone City, there were still many other directions. Why did they have to hit the mountain? The people of the grassland lived on horseback since they were young. If they left their horses, they wouldn't even know how to live. Of course, they wouldn't be willing to climb the mountain. They would rather die on horseback than climb the mountain to avoid a calamity. Furthermore, the mountain peaks on the grassland were just a few hills to the inland. They weren't towering mountains or steep ridges, let alone hiding them. It was said that there were a few valleys in Miaofeng Peak where there were refugees from the inland who were farming there. This wasn't something that these grassland men were willing to do. With their bodies, they could ride horses, dance with swords, and shoot arrows, but they couldn't hold a hoe. Yuan Hua actually didn't quite understand. The chieftain said that Miaofeng Peak is a legendary forbidden area. It forbids killing, and there's a mountain god protecting it. We can't go to Jingang's stronghold, and we can't run to Stone City. We can only go to Miaofeng Peak and try our luck. Bao was dissatisfied. The chieftain is crazy. He actually treated the legends as the truth. He'll get us all killed. In the Gale Plains and even in the Yanzhou country, there were actually legends of Miaofeng Peak. In a world that didn't believe in ghosts and gods, it was a very rare thing. There was a Taoist temple on Miaofeng Peak. Bao had been there before. There were a few dilapidated houses, and using the word temple to describe it was an overstatement. There were a few weak Taoists who were hungry and full, and their faces were emaciated. The people of the grassland raised cows and sheep, but they raised pigs. It was only because it was easier to raise pigs, and they didn't need to go out to graze. However, those things were extremely dirty, so how could they be eaten? Then, there was a vegetable garden. However, such a Taoist temple had existed for an unknown period of time. It was as if in the records of the grassland, no matter how long the history was, this Taoist temple had always existed. It seemed to be even older than the Yanzhou country. It was even older than the previous dynasty of the Yanzhou country. It was even older than the legends of the grassland. It was so old that all the historical records seemed to mention this Taoist temple that didn't even have a name. The continent was in constant war. This was also not a place of civilization, and the flames of war burned even more frequently. That Taoist temple seemed to have been burned countless times and destroyed countless times. However, after a period of time after it was destroyed, it would always stubbornly be rebuilt, even if the construction became more and more sloppy and the materials became more and more shoddy. A strange Taoist temple, a strange persistence. It was unknown how those half-dead Taoists were able to pass down generation after generation in the long river of history. They were sick and crooked, but they never fell. Therefore, it was unknown where and when this legend came from. It said that Miao Feng Peak was protected by the mountain god and other similar nonsense. Everyone knew that there were no gods in this world. No one would place their hopes of survival on such an illusory legend. That was an irresponsible act towards life. And now, their clan leader, the wisest person in the clan, had placed the hope of survival on Miao Feng Peak, which made many young people like Sherbao disapprove of it. They would rather die on the back of a horse than climb a mountain. To be honest, people who were used to clamping on horses were not suitable for climbing mountains.
There was no other way.
Everyone was running in that direction, so it was impossible for them to part ways just like that. Chapter 1672. P.S. Don't forget the link below the app to select the best author. Looking for subscriptions and monthly votes. Thank you for your support. Lu Xiaoyi finally got close to splendid heaven and earth. After 33 years, he had killed 33 people. In the end, no matter how slow he flew, no one dared to find trouble with him, whether it was a 3-man team or a 10-man team. Actually, it was only a few years of delay in the beginning of the long journey. After the void hunting ended, there were no more such troubles. He walked leisurely with his half-baked smog in his head. After entering the Heavenly Eyes organization for hundreds of years, he had not done many missions, but he had already become an old fox in the organization. The characteristic of an old fox was that they did not take missions seriously. They traveled all the way and did not distinguish between public and private matters. In fact, it was a process of consolidating themselves and forming auspicious clouds. When the magnificent figure of splendid heaven and earth appeared in the sky, even a veteran void traveler like him could not help but be amazed. It was really too magnificent. The last continent that left such an impression on him was in the negative space, and it was the universe's first continent, Heaven's Choice. It was light green, surrounded by flocculent white lines. It had a huge body and a stable structure. The surrounding astronomical phenomena were just right, creating a situation that was most favorable for human survival. After more than 1,000 years of cultivation, he already had a deep understanding of the various celestial bodies in the universe. It was an understanding from the perspective of cultivation, especially now that his understanding of the 5 ties and chaos had increased to a certain extent. In fact, the size of the celestial bodies in the universe was regulated. Not to mention the small ones, just the size of the celestial bodies was affected by various factors. It was not that the bigger the better, but there was a certain maximum limit. The bigger the size, the greater the influence of the surrounding celestial bodies, stars, planets, and various astronomical phenomena. The gravitational force between celestial bodies still existed in this cultivation world, but it did not mean that there was no basic mechanism of the universe with cultivation. The Heaven's Choice continent was an accident. It was actually a huge source of gravitational force, sucking all matter in the anti-space towards itself, just like a huge black hole. This kind of existence couldn't last long. Although it was still very stable now, if the timeline was stretched infinitely long, when there was no other matter in the anti-space that could be attracted to it, that would be the day the Heaven's Choice continent would fall apart. Originally, this kind of time span wasn't something that humans could predict. However, if the epoch change was added, everything would become complicated and confusing. Lu Xiaoyi had once predicted that the positive and negative space might merge. This was just his intuition. He actually had another intuition, which was that the Heaven's Choice continent also existed. When the positive and negative space merged, the entire Heaven's Choice continent might collapse into several, or even several hundred continents. This prediction was too terrifying, and it was hard for the Heaven's Chosen One to accept it, so he never mentioned it to anyone. This was the limit of the size of the universe's celestial bodies. Too big meant instability. It was the same in the origin world. As huge as Zhou Xian was, why was it also made up of 3,000 small continents? There was such a reason. When Lu Xiaoyi traveled the universe, the largest cultivation domain he saw was actually his own mother planet's 5 rings. It was almost the limit of a celestial body as a whole. If it was any bigger, the core wouldn't be able to withstand it, and there would be problems due to the various attraction and tearing of the celestial bodies in the universe. Then, this splendid heaven and earth was much bigger than the 5 rings, so how did it maintain such stability? The key point was that this was a celestial body without any spiritual vigor, which meant that it didn't even have the support of the earth's crust. Without these extraordinary powers, how did it purely rely on the structure of the celestial body to withstand the various inexplicable powers in the universe? He wouldn't have considered these things before, but as his horizons broadened, he had many doubts. The mission he received now was in this domain, so he couldn't help but think about it. Many things in this place might seem normal to others, but to a cautious primordial soul stage cultivator, they were abnormal. It wasn't easy to cultivate to the primordial soul stage, so his life was more important. Gradually, he got closer. Under his perception, there was indeed no trace of spiritual vigor. It wasn't the kind of spiritual vigor that was faintly discernible after exhaustion, nor was it the kind of spiritual vigor that was hidden in the depths of the earth's core that had been restless all this time. There was no spiritual vigor at all. Needless to say, this kind of feeling made him feel closer. Just like the place in his previous life, it represented the high development of human culture and civilization. He just didn't know how much influence cultivation had on this place. One fact was that the largest population in the universe wasn't insects, but humans. He could guess that even if there wasn't a trace of spiritual vigor here, there would definitely be cultivators who stopped here to experience the mortal world, gather faith, and all kinds of strange reasons. He was a cautious person. He circled the splendid heaven and earth from far to near, circling in circles, carefully sensing the various auras of this huge domain. During this process, he was surprised to find that there were no traces of any cultivators. Whether they came in or went out, it was as if this was an ordinary domain, a forbidden area for cultivators. Were they all so self-disciplined? When cultivators passed through the atmosphere, they would always leave behind some kind of aura that wouldn't dissipate and would last for a long time. However, he didn't feel this at all. This was very abnormal. Any cultivator who passed by, even if it was just to satisfy their curiosity, would have to go in and take a look before leaving. After circling the splendid heaven and earth for almost a month, he didn't find anything. There was also no trace of any cultivators. He didn't hesitate anymore and jumped, descending into the atmosphere. It was also at this moment that a strange feeling suddenly descended. It wasn't a feeling that appeared on the outside, but in the depths of his consciousness. An old and melodious voice was loud and clear. Why seek the ethereal mountain when you know the meaning of the humble abode? The beer shouldn't be far. It should belong to the mortal world. This is the splendid heaven and earth. I'm the splendid immortal. Cultivators can't enter this place. The immortal court's laws are an eternal example. If you force yourself, you will face punishment. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this wasn't the real immortal here. It was just a little bit of the immortal's true spirit guarding here. He didn't want to challenge the immortal's authority at all. Although he was very confident in his own strength, he wasn't that stupid. He sent out a trace of the power of faith and replied with his divine sense, "I'm a cultivator of the heavenly eyes. I'm here under orders to help the fellow cultivators here." The true spirit scanned Lu Xiaoyi's sea of consciousness and understood. It was very straightforward. Since you're here under orders from the heavenly eyes, you can enter. But there's one thing. Once you enter, you'll be immortal without a trace of a cultivator's ability. Have you thought it through? Lu Xiaoyi was just about to agree when he suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. If he really became immortal, the ability to move would be a big problem. The splendid heaven was so big. If he landed in the wrong place and hurried on the ground, wouldn't he have to run for another 10 years? He hurriedly said, I want to go to Yanjiao. Please show me the way. The true spirit said calmly, I know you're going to Yanjiao, to the splendid heaven and earth. Is there any other place to go? Don't worry, just go down. Chapter 1673. P.S. Don't forget the link below the app to select the best author. It's just a matter of convenience. Begging for subscriptions, monthly votes, average results, no energy. Thank you for your support. The group in Xiaoguan village was still galloping. The number of people had dropped below 200. To them, this was a matter of life and death. One of the riders showed signs of falling behind. Yuan Hua went forward to help him, but Shibao's eyes were burning with anger. This person who didn't even know how to ride a horse was an outsider from the inland. He claimed that he was here to study and was attracted by the grassland scenery. He was a bookworm who had lost his mind from studying in the inland. People like him were not rare in the grassland. Most of them were scholars from the inland who lived a comfortable life. However, this young scholar named Mu Nan was different. He stayed in Xiaoguan village to spread knowledge to the children of the tribe. He was very popular and respected by the villagers. He had been here for several months, but he did not expect to encounter such a disaster. Shibao did not like him for any other reason. It was because many of the youths in the tribe liked to gather and listen to this poor man tell stories about the outside world. One of them was his sweetheart, Yuan Hua. She even gave this poor man food and drinks. If you can't ride a horse and wield a sword, you don't deserve to live in this world. This was the mindset of the grassland men. Although they hated him, they knew right from wrong and would not really do anything. After all, he was still a guest. He urged his horse to squeeze through and grabbed the horse's bit. I'll help him. You guys go quickly. Yuan Hua let go. In terms of riding skills, no one among the younger generation in Xiaoguan village could compare to Shibao. With him leading, they were much better than her. Only Wuya was giggling at the side. As his sister, how could she not know her brother's real intention? Sure enough, with Shibao's help, the horses' running became more coordinated. This was a necessary skill for an excellent shepherd. Shibao's face was cold. Hey, when you teach people, you should at least have the most basic survival skills, right? You can't always be a burden to others, right? Mu Nan chuckled. No conflict, no conflict. Practical experience is important, but so is theoretical knowledge. Thank you. This horse is a little disobedient. Of course, he had no problem riding a horse. However, if he were to run for his life like now, there would be a series of problems in the long run. He still couldn't master how to coordinate Molly to the greatest extent while running at high speed. This required a long period of practice. Can you throw away those books? You have to understand that if a horse runs for a long time, even a few extra gene of weight will affect its physical strength. Don't be a miser. Can't you see that we've thrown away the most valuable things? Mu Nan shook his head firmly. No. Books are more important than money. You don't understand. I won't drag you down. If I really fall behind, I'll dismount and reveal my identity. They may not do anything to me, since I'm just a traveling scholar. Shibao sneered. Of course. Do you think the bandits lack a teacher? I think you've become stupid from reading too many novels. Under the galloping of the group of horses, who would pay attention to whether or not you were from the pass. Even if I don't chop you, I'll still stomp you to death. Mu Nan shook his head like a rattledrum. I don't know if we're short of teachers, but maybe we're short of someone who can write home? Shibao, don't look down on books. They're all very reasonable. Besides, there are so many bandits. Their nest must be short of literate people, right? Shibao was annoyed and ignored him. He held the horse tightly and loosened it rhythmically so that the horse could run more easily. The horse was a good horse, but the person was terrible. He didn't know how to control Molly. Yuan Hua laughed at the side. Sir, you're thinking too much. The bandits don't lack literate people. They have accountants, butlers, scribes, everything. They don't lack you. Mu Nan's interest was piqued. Run to Miaofeng Peak. I know that place. Don't think that it's very ordinary, but it's very famous in Yanzhou. It's even spread to the nearby dozens of countries. I've always wanted to see whether it's true or not. This is just the right time to fulfill my wish. I support the chief's decision. Sure, Bao couldn't help but say, "What's the use of your support? When they come for us with their sabers, won't we have to face them? You're about to die, and you're still thinking about traveling? I think you're just—" Munan shook his head. Not at all. Brother Bao, don't be fooled by my weak scholarly appearance. I can still fence. Ordinary people can't get close to me. Fencing and horseback riding are all part of the 6 virtues of a gentleman. Although I can't compare to you in horseback riding, that's another matter. Do you know how to paddle? Wu Ya's voice was crisp. Sir, your fencing skills may be able to deal with the ruffians in the inland, but those who are chasing after us are desperados who live on the edge of their blades. A long sword is slender and isn't good at chopping. It'll break in one hit. A real fight is different from what you think. Wrong horse, with 2 swords. Sir, your beautiful posture won't be useful. When scholars traveled outside, of course, they would carry a sword on their back. Firstly, it was for self-defense. Only with a horse and a sword would one be able to travel to the ends of the world. When Munan was in Xiaoguan village, he would often entertain himself with his sword in the mornings and evenings. It was indeed beautiful. However, in the eyes of these people from the grassland, it was just for show. They didn't expose him in normal times because they had to at least give him some face. But now, in a real fight like this, if he still thought that way, he would probably be cut in half. What was the use of having a belly full of knowledge in this chaotic world? Munan didn't argue with them over these details. He was very clear where his advantage lay. It was because of his vast knowledge. For example, the countless legends of this Miaofeng mountain were difficult to pass down in a small tribe like Xiaoguan village. This was the power of words. Although he had never been here, he knew too much about this mountain. The 3 wonders of Miaofeng Mountain. The first wonder is that the inheritance will never be broken. No matter if it's water, fire, or war, the Taoist temple on this mountain will always be rebuilt. It's still standing to this day. Bao was disdainful. He had personally seen it. Isn't it just a few broken houses? It's not strange that it's destroyed and rebuilt. There are always convicts who escaped from the inland. What's so difficult about building a few broken houses? According to what you said, the sheep pen in Xiaoguan village has a history of hundreds of years. Is it also a legend? Munan knew that he couldn't argue with him. Once he did, there would be no end to it. He could only continue to spread his knowledge. Heir of Miaofeng Mountain, no matter if it's war, or bandits, I've never heard of a Taoist who died in a war. There were records that said that the Taoist priests here lived for more than 100 years and were still hale and hearty. Bao continued to refute. Of course they didn't die, but they often starved. If there was a war, they would just find a cave to hide in. Who would have the patience to go through the mouse hole to find them? The last time I went to Miaofeng Mountain, those Taoist priests stared at my flock of sheep. It was obvious that they hadn't eaten meat for months. I only gave them 2 sheep, and they were so grateful. They insisted that I stay in the temple to study, write, and practice swordsmanship. They said that only by studying can I have a bright future.
Bah.
Are they people who can't even afford to eat meat? Oh right, they're just like you. They're just holding a broken sword and waving it around like they're dancing. I don't know how many cracks have appeared on the body of the sword, but they're still reluctant to find a blacksmith to reforge it. It's good that you're there.
You can dance with them.
You don't have to be a scholar anymore. You might as well be a Taoist priest. Since we're acquaintances, I might even bring you a few sheep during festivals. Chapter 1674. Although Bao had thick eyebrows and big eyes, he had a sharp tongue. He was famous in Guansun village. However, his loose tongue did not mean that he had a bad heart. Even though he was disgusted by this poor scholar, he did not relax his grip on the horse's chew so that the scholar could keep up with the group. However, their situation was getting worse. Although they were a tribe that grew up on horseback, the horse bandits were no weaker than them. After all, one was a professional robber while the other was a part-time herder. There was a difference. Just as Bao and Moonan were arguing, several groups of elderly tribesmen turned back to stop them. There was no tragedy here, only cruelty. The people who turned back knew that their sacrifice would give their relatives and nephews a chance to survive. The people who were being protected also knew that when they grew older, they would have the same opportunity to contribute. This was the survival of the grassland people. The horse bandits were already a mile away. If this continued, they would enter the range of the enemy's arrows in no time. But our arrows will hit them first. Bao gritted his teeth. After a while, I will turn back to join the battle. I won't be able to protect you anymore. Take care of yourself and steer the horse well. Don't look around and let others take care of you. The rest are women and children, who can continue to lead the horse for you. Moonan did not appreciate it at all. Why should I leave? Of course I will fight with you. Even if I can't kill anyone, I can at least attract the attention of a horse bandit. Bao sighed. He had not wasted his time leading the horse for him. These were the words of a human, so it was worth it. Thank you for your kindness. But forget about it. If I see you in danger, do you think I will save you or not? Moonan was still the same. Although he was afraid, it did not stop him from being a good teacher. It's not right for you to let the elderly cover the retreat. Where is the respect for the elderly and love for the young? If it were us inland people, we would let the young and strong go and the old and weak retreat. This is the foundation of the human race's prosperity. You are too. Bao shouted. Survival of the fittest, natural selection. You are pretending to be benevolent in Gale Plain. After a battle, only the old and weak will be left. Your tribe will be wiped out. What future do you have to talk about? Sour scholar, I don't want to argue with you. Under the pursuit of the horse bandits, Miao Gaofeng's figure became clearer and clearer. However, the sound of death's hooves was getting closer and closer. Although Miao Feng Peak was called a peak if it was compared to the mountains inland, it might just be a hill. This was a ring-shaped mountain. The east side was the highest, reaching a height of several hundred feet. It could barely be called a peak. The other directions did not even have a name. There was only a valley in the middle of the ring-shaped mountain. It could be considered a treasured place in the grassland. The water and grass were abundant, and the climate was pleasant. It was unknown why, after hundreds and thousands of years, there were no horse bandits entrenched here. Only the exiles from the interior cultivated the land here, but they didn't have much of a scale. Moonan suddenly realized something. Hey, if we lure the horse bandits in like this, if the mountain god doesn't show his power, won't we be causing trouble for the people inside and hurting the innocent? The prairie people have always considered themselves as heroes. You can't avert the trouble away like this, can you? This time, even the sharp-tongued Bao couldn't say anything. They all vaguely realized that something was wrong, but they didn't know how to change it. Even if a few people changed their direction, they wouldn't be able to change the situation. There were only 100 or 200 people left in Xiaoguan village. The elderly and the young were almost all dead. It was also because of their sacrifice, the hope of the tribe, that the young men and women had the opportunity to break into Miao Feng Valley. The women carried their children in front, while the young men like Bao blocked the entrance of the valley, including the women who could pick up weapons and arrows. They had no way out. The worst thing was that the mountain god didn't seem to have any reaction to this. Dozens of young men and women were facing the outside of the valley, blocking the entrance of the valley into a thin formation. They didn't learn any formations, nor did they know the tactics of the inland people. They didn't dismount from their horses, but sat straight on their horses with their scimitars in front of their saddles. They held their bows and waited for the horse bandits to attack. At least they should dismount. If they didn't have time to dig holes, they could use some branches to set fire. If they didn't learn how to use the environment, how could they fight a war? Moonan pouted. Although he also didn't have any experience in war, the things he learned from books told him that it was wrong to do so. Since they were so defensive, They might as well not enter the valley and fight for their lives outside. But he didn't say anything in the end, because this was the nature of the grassland people. It was something that couldn't be changed. Even if they defended as he imagined, the difference in numbers and strength would only delay them for a moment. It was better than nothing, so it didn't seem to be meaningful. The grassland people would rather die on horseback. Bao frowned as he looked at Munan's exquisitely crafted longsword.
He sighed.
This thing was useless when used on a horse. It was too straight, too thin, and too brittle. But he didn't have any extra scimitars. If he didn't know how to use a scimitar, he would hurt himself. It was a weapon that could please the ladies of the noble families and show off their heroism. When we clash later, follow closely. Focus on the front and don't look around. If you're lucky enough to survive, just find a direction and run. Seeing that you are dressed like a scholar, they might not chase after you. Munan said angrily, "There are so many women around. Why do you have to pick on me? Are you trying to humiliate me on purpose?" At the last moment, Bao said softly, "I don't want to talk to them about this because they are from the lower pass. This is our fate. You are different. You are a guest. We grassland people never ask our guests to fight for us." Munan gathered his chi and said, "You treat me as a guest, but the horse bandits don't care about that. What's the difference?" I'm suddenly in the mood for poetry.
Don't disturb me.
Bao shook his head. He had nothing to say. Although this bookworm was annoying, it wasn't that he had no redeeming qualities. It was just that he didn't know if he could come up with a poem before his brain was removed. The horse bandits on the opposite side slowed down. Their opponent was already at death's door and had nowhere to run, so there was no need to rush. But this Miao Feng Peak was a little strange, so they had to be cautious. The legend was not only limited to scholars, but also among the people who fought in Jianghu. Gale Plain was extremely vast, but there weren't many places with good feng shui like Miao Feng Peak. As long as they were strong enough, they could make this place their stronghold and start a big business. But for thousands of years, not a single group of horse bandits dared to open a business here. Outsiders might not know, but they were well aware. It wasn't that there were no horse bandits who had never come here, but none of them could stay here. The strangeness of this place was incomprehensible. They could only talk about it in the direction of the supernatural. None of the horse bandit leaders who came here had a good ending. There were no exceptions. Chapter 1675. Seeing that everyone was hesitant, it was reasonable. The small bandits might not care, but the leaders would care. If they knew that they would die, who would be willing to covet this little bit of feng shui? The fifth boss was the most resourceful among them, so he made a suggestion. "We won't occupy Miao Feng Peak, and we won't kill Miao Jiren either. We'll just go in and clean up the place, and then we'll come out. I don't think those evil things will affect us. Tell our brothers to restrain themselves when we go in. Don't go too far and kill people or set fires." The other leaders agreed. They had chased them all the way here, so they couldn't just give up. If they didn't set an example, anyone on the grassland would be able to wrestle with them in the future. So everyone agreed. Several groups of people entered the valley one by one. The leader was the fifth boss who had made a suggestion. 500 horse bandits, all of whom were young masters, were not unexpected in such a battle. What the leaders were more worried about was how to rein in the troops after they went in. The fifth boss took the lead, which was a necessary quality in this line of work. Especially when he wanted to climb up further, of course, he had to fully show his bravery. The horse neighed, and the fifth boss used all of his skills. To be honest, his fighting strength was quite high among the bandits. Coupled with his intelligence, it was not difficult for him to deal with these young men who were still wet behind the ears. He would charge first, and then control his speed to let his brothers overtake him halfway through the journey. Even if he wanted to show his bravery, he couldn't really charge in front. It was all a routine. Knives and spears had no eyes. But there was a problem with his wisdom this time. Before he could fully show his bravery, when he was still in the state of charging in front, an unexpected disaster fell from the sky. The danger was not in front of him, nor was it in the side that he observed with a sidelong glance. It came from the sky. Amidst the exclamations of the people behind him, his vigilance could only be placed in front of him. However, he did not expect that a black shadow would fall from the sky and smash right on top of his head. The pitiful fifth elder's lofty ambitions had not been realized. He had not had the time to display his ambitions. His neck was broken by this collision, and his soul was sent to heaven. Heavy objects fell from the sky, and people were running at full speed. How could it be any good under such relative speed? Before the horse bandits could charge forward, they were shocked by this sudden change. They all stopped their horses and wanted to see what was falling from the sky. That thing bumped into the fifth master and rolled a few times on the ground. Unexpectedly, it stood up by itself. *CKU. I almost fell to my death. It was really a human, a Taoist with a dusty face. His entire body was in a sorry state because he had rolled on the ground. But looking at his arms and legs, it seemed that he did not suffer any serious injuries from the fall. Regardless of whether it was the horse bandits or the people who went down the mountain, they couldn't help but look up. They wanted to know where he came from. Although the mountain peak was not high, to be able to jump out and fall to the mouth of the valley, this jumping ability was simply heaven-defying. Mu Nan was very surprised. Is this the manifestation of the mountain god? Send a Taoist to save us? Bao was also dumbfounded. How did he fall down? Could it have been thrown out by a catapult? Both sides were shocked by this accident. Putting aside the battle, they wanted to figure out where this person had fallen from. And it seemed that his hair was not injured? Just because of the fifth master, this big meat cushion? Lu Xiaoyi stood up and patted his body to make sure that he wasn't missing any parts, or that he had broken any functions. To a primordial spirit like him, this was something that could be done in a flash. But now he was no longer a cultivator. He did not know what method that immortal Jin Xiao had used to completely seal his abilities in the depths of his soul. He could feel it, but he could not break it or use it. This was different from the time on Rustar in Zhou Xian. That time, he only lost his memory and could not use his methods. But at least his body was still there. In the mortal world, he had the ability to pretend to be a male and female thief. But his current situation was that his memory, experience, and vision were still there, but Sparrow Palace was sealed. His elemental energy was sealed. Even his body's abilities were sealed. He did not know if the sealed abilities in the depths of his soul would burst out if he was really faced with a life and death situation. It was very unreliable, and he did not dare to try it. The only thing that was not sealed was Qi. Luckily, he was smart. After hearing Immortal Jin Xiao's warning, he took out Qi and carried it on his back, just to guard against this. Now, it seemed that he was too wise. He could not open the storage ring, so all his possessions were unattainable to him. But there was also good news. Although Qi Yi's sword spirit was sealed, its material was placed here. It was not doubtful to say that it was a divine weapon, right? The physical abilities of a cultivator were gone, but it belonged to an old monster who had trained for more than 1,500 years. His muscles were still rare in the mortal world. It seemed that he could still survive. The magical abilities of a true immortal were simply amazing. He was 5 or 6 levels below them, especially when there was a huge gap between half immortal and immortal, so it was not strange for him to be restricted like this. He fell very quickly and lost his divine sense, so he did not know what was going on below. But as long as he saw the difference between the two parties, the number of people, the way they dressed, and the aura, he naturally understood something. He still had the same philosophy. There was no absolute right or wrong. Everyone was just trying to make a living. Therefore, he patted the dust off his body and bowed to both parties. It is not easy to be reincarnated. The most important thing is to live and enjoy life. Why do we have to fight to the death? I came from afar and have long admired the wonders of Miaofeng Mountain. I have always wanted to go there, so I wandered here. I did not expect to be swept by a strange wind. Yes, it is a pity for this hero. Let me make a compromise for both of you. Let's sit down and drink wine and dance together. By the way, which mountain is Meowfing Mountain? I still have to rush over to meet you. There were often strange winds in the grassland, and one of them was a waterspout. It was so powerful that it could sweep a huge cow that was close to 500 kilograms into the air and throw it far away. Although this explanation was a little far-fetched, it was still somewhat reasonable. As for why he was fine even though the fifth head was dead, there were many strange things in this world, and he could not explain them one by one. After his explanation, both sides understood. After the initial surprise, things began to return to their original rhythm. 2 horses galloped out. They should be the trusted subordinates of the fifth head. One of them shouted, "If you kill someone, you have to pay with your life. This is the rule of the grassland. You, a crazy Taoist, are spouting nonsense here. Do you think you are very impressive?" The 2 horses leaped from both sides of the Taoist. With a flash of their scimitars, the 2 flying horses ran away in shock. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.